The river behind the row of houses ran the color of weak tea, carrying bottle glass and scraps of torn newspaper along the reeds. Even in late summer, the air tasted of soot. The chimneys of Cokeworth always seemed to be exhaling. The sky was never entirely its own. Severus kept to the bank where nettles grew thick and tall, their sting familiar enough that he moved through them without flinching. Lily followed more cautiously, lifting her skirt a little, frowning at the mud as if it were an argument she hadn't yet decided whether to win. "Don't," he said, and when she paused, confused, he nodded at the plants. "They'll get you. I'm not made of glass." She looked over her shoulder toward the narrow path between the houses. Petunia lingered there, arms folded, her mouth pinched into the shape of a sneer. Petunia's gaze swept over Severus like he was something the river had coughed up. Severus pretended not to see her. He had learned early that pretending was sometimes the only power a person had. Lily stepped nearer. "Show me again." He hesitated. It was one thing to do it when he was alone, when the world was only him and the weeds and the low grind of distant machinery. It was another thing to do it with someone watching, someone whose eyes widened with wonder instead of narrowing with contempt. He held out his hand, palm up. The branch he'd found, no thicker than his thumb, stripped of leaves, lay across his skin. He breathed in, slow, like he was swallowing his nerves, and he felt the strange, familiar pressure behind his ribs, the way it always came before something happened. He didn't know what to call it. He only knew it was there, coiled up, waiting. The branch trembled. Lily's lips parted. It rose, not suddenly, but as if the air itself had grown hands and was lifting it carefully to avoid snapping it. It hovered a few inches above his palm, turning a fraction, obeying the tilt of his fingers, as if he were turning a key. Lily made a sound that wasn't quite laughter and wasn't quite a gasp. That's magic," he said, and the word tasted dangerous, like saying it might summon someone to punish him. He lowered his hand, and the branch settled back down. Petunia hissed from the path. "Freak." Lily's head snapped up. "Shut up, Toonie." Petunia's face reddened, and for a moment Severus saw exactly how Lily's defiance would harden with age, how it would become something bright and unyielding. Petunia turned away with a stiff, offended jerk, as if the air itself had slapped her. Lily returned her attention to Severus. "How do you do it?" He shrugged, though pride warmed him like stolen fire. "I just can." "And your mum?" Lily asked, as if she were piecing together a secret map. "She can too?" Severus's eyes flicked to his own house, or what he called his house. The cramped, damp place that smelled of stale cabbage and old anger. The front room window was dim. The curtains were drawn even when it was daylight. Sometimes he heard shouting through the walls, words like stones thrown hard. Sometimes he heard nothing at all, which could be worse. "My mum," he said carefully. "She's different." "Different how?" He looked at Lily, at the way the fading light caught the copper in her hair. "Like me." Lily's smile was small and fierce. "Then it's not a bad thing." Severus didn't answer. He didn't trust the world enough to agree out loud. He slid his hand into his pocket and pulled out the battered book he'd taken from the library, old enough that its pages smelled of dust and glue. He opened it with reverence. "I've been reading about a place." "A place?" Lily leaned in, her shoulder brushing his. It was a casual touch, but it struck him like a promise. "A school," he said, watching her reaction as if it mattered more than oxygen. "For people like us. It's called Hogwarts." Lily repeated it softly. "Hogwarts." "There are houses," Severus went on, the words spilling now that he'd started. "4 of them. Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff. The best one is Slytherin." Lily wrinkled her nose. "How do you know?" "It says," he insisted, tapping the page. "They have the cleverest, the most powerful. They don't." He stopped himself, not wanting to say what he'd really read between the lines. That Slytherin didn't take kindly to people like Petunia. Lily's eyes danced. "You're already choosing." Severus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "You should. Think about it." "Nah." Lily's gaze went distant, as if she could see a castle through the smog. "I'd want the one that feels like being brave." Her grin widened, daring the universe to contradict her. "Gryffindor sounds brave." Severus swallowed. Brave wasn't what he'd ever been called. Brave belonged to boys who fought back, boys with fathers who didn't drink and spit, boys with shoes that fit. Brave was a thing other people owned. He closed the book. "We'll see?" Above them, the first star pricked through the smoke. Severus stared at it until his eyes watered, and in his chest the strange coiled power stirred again, restless, as if it too wanted to run towards something shining. King's Cross smelled like hot metal and hurried breath. The ceiling arched above them in dark ribs, the ironwork webbed with soot. Lily's parents moved a little too slowly, turning their heads as if the station might bite. Petunia trailed behind, her face set like she'd been forced to attend a funeral. Severus stood at the edge of their little knot, separate even when he was near. His own parents hadn't come. He'd told Lily they were busy. He hadn't told her that his father had called the whole thing nonsense, and his mother had gone silent in a way that made Severus feel like he was shrinking. Lily looked up at the sign, Platform 9, and then at Platform 10. "It's between," she whispered. "Yes." Severus kept his voice low, as though a wrong volume might shatter the spell. He'd memorized the instructions from a thin official letter. "Walk straight at the barrier. Don't stop. Don't be afraid." "Don't be afraid," Lily repeated and grinned as if fear was a dare. Petunia's lips curled. "You'll break your neck," Lily's mother said sharply. "Petunia." Lily didn't look away from the barrier. "Come on, Sev." They moved together, pushing their trolleys. Severus's hands sweated on the metal bar. The barrier loomed, solid and indifferent. The world around it swirled with muggle motion, people calling to each other, newspapers flapping, a child crying. Lily's eyes were bright. She didn't slow down. Severus didn't either, though his stomach dropped as if the ground had vanished. For a heartbeat he expected pain, stone against flesh, humiliation on the station floor. Instead, the air folded. They were through, and the sound changed. It was as if the station behind them had been muffled by a thick wall. Ahead lay another platform, crowded with trunks and owls and cats, witches in cloaks, wizards with battered hats. A scarlet train breathed steam like a living animal. Lily laughed, breathless. Severus's chest loosened. He felt, for the first time in his life, that the world might contain a place for him. And then someone spoke nearby, loud and amused. "Blimey, look at it." Two boys stood by their own trolley, as if they'd been born knowing exactly where to put their feet. One had tidy black hair and round glasses. The other's dark hair fell in glossy waves, and his grin was sharp as a knife. The boy with glasses looked Severus up and down with instant, unearned disdain. "You heading for Hogwarts too?" Severus narrowed his eyes. "Obviously." The other boy snorted, as if Severus' tone entertained him. "What house do you reckon you'll be in?" Severus's chin lifted. "Slytherin." The boy with glasses made a face. "Who wants to be in Slytherin? I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?" Lily's smile faltered. Severus felt something sour uncoil in him. "My whole family have been in Slytherin," he lied, because it sounded better than the truth. "And I suppose yours have all been in Gryffindor." The dark-haired boy's eyes glittered. "Blimey," he said again, but this time it sounded like a warning. "Mine? Probably, and I'm glad of it." The boy with glasses turned to his friend, ignoring Severus. "Where are you hoping to be?" The dark-haired boy shrugged like the world belonged to him. "Gryffindor. Like you, James." Me. Ah. And oh. So that was his name. James. It sat in Severus' mind like a splinter. Lily stepped forward, her voice bright but edged. "There's nothing wrong with Slytherin." James looked at her properly then, as if noticing a painting he might want to steal. His grin softened by a fraction. "Didn't say there was, just not for me." Severus's hands curled into fists. "It's for people who are clever," he snapped. The dark-haired boy, Sirius. James had called him by implication, though Severus didn't yet know the name, laughed outright. "Oh, he's clever, is he?" he said to James, like Severus wasn't there. "Look at him. He looks like he crawled out of a drain." Lily's cheeks went pink with anger. "He doesn't." Severus's throat tightened. The old familiar humiliation rose fast, hot and choking, the feeling of being laughed at by people who had no right. He wanted to do something, anything, that would wipe the smirk off Sirius' face. The coiled power inside him twitched eager. But the platform was crowded. Adults moved around them. And Severus had learned that some fights cost more than they gave. He leaned close to Lily, voice low. "Come on, they're not worth it." James' laugh followed them, bright and careless, like the crack of a whip. Severus didn't look back. If he did, he feared he might do something that would stain the day. They found an empty compartment. Lily shoved her trunk up with a grunt, hair falling in her eyes. Severus watched her, the fierce competence of her small hands. When she looked up, smiling again, some of the poison in him eased. The whistle shrieked. The train lurched. Cokeworth and Petunia and all the small, cramped ugliness of Severus's life began to slide away. But James and Sirius remained, planted like thorns in the same soil Severus was trying to escape. By the time the train pulled into Hogsmeade, night had fallen thick and cold. The platform was slick with damp, the air sharp enough to sting Severus's lungs. Lamps threw puddles of light onto faces, some pale with excitement, some pinched with nerves. Lily's eyes were huge. She clutched her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Severus tried to look like the cold didn't bother him. A towering figure moved through the crowd like a mountain walking. A lantern swung in his fist, its light catching in his beard. "Fur's ears," he bellowed, voice booming off the stone. "Fur's his years over eerie." Severus stared. The man looked like he'd been carved out of a tree trunk. His coat was enormous. His hands were the size of shovels. Lily whispered, "Is he Hagrid?" Severus said, because he'd read the name in a footnote somewhere, and it made him feel steadier to know something. "He works at Hogwarts." Hagrid herded them down a slope toward the lake. The path was narrow, lined with black trees that leaned like eavesdroppers. Severus kept close to Lily, not out of affection, though that was there too, burning quietly, but out of instinct. In the dark, people were easier to lose. At the water's edge, small boats waited, rocking gently. Lanterns hung from posts, their light trembling across the surface like broken coins. "4 to a boat," Hagrid called. Severus and Lily climbed in with 2 other children, a plump boy who panted like he'd run the whole way, and a thin girl whose hair was braided so tight it pulled her eyebrows up. The boat dipped under their combined weight, then steadied. The moment Hagrid pushed them off, Severus felt something settle over him, a hush that wasn't natural. The lake seemed to swallow sound. Even the other children fell quiet. They glided forward, water black and deep beneath them. Severus looked up. Hogwarts rose on the far bank, enormous and impossible. Towers speared the sky. Windows burned with torchlight. The castle looked less like a school and more like a fortress built to withstand wars. Lily's breath caught. "It's real," she whispered, and the words sounded like prayer. Severus didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed. He stared at the castle until his eyes stung, as if he could imprint it inside his skull. The boats bumped against stone steps. They climbed out, boots scraping wet rock, and followed Hagrid through an arched doorway into warmth. The air inside smelled of polish and old stone, of candle smoke and something sweet beneath it. Magic, maybe, or history. They were ushered into a small chamber off a grand hall. Severus could hear a roar of voices through the door, a swell like the sea. The children clustered together, cloaks brushing, whispers rising and dying. Lily leaned close. "Seth, what if I'm not? What if I don't belong?" He looked at her, startled. Lily afraid. It seemed impossible, but her fingers were white around her cloak clasp. "You belong," he said fiercely, surprising himself with the certainty. You're Lily." She smiled, a little shaky. "And you're Severus, so you belong too." The door opened. Heat and noise hit them like a wave. The great hall stretched vast, its ceiling enchanted to show a night sky full of stars. Hundreds of candles floated in the air, their flames steady. 4 long tables were crammed with students, faces turned toward the newcomers, murmuring. Severus's skin prickled with being watched. At the far end, a staff table sat on a raised platform. A man with a long silver beard sat at the center, his eyes bright behind half-moon spectacles. Even from here, Severus felt the weight of him, like standing near a storm. Albus Dumbledore. The name rang through Severus's mind like a bell. McGonagall led them to a stool set before the staff table. On it lay an old patched wizard's hat, frayed at the brim. It looked absurd, until Severus saw, with a jolt, that it had a mouth. The hat began to sing, its voice surprisingly clear, and the students listened as if this were sacred ritual, as if a shabby hat could decide fate. Severus barely heard the words. He watched the stool, watched the hat, watched McGonagall's hands on the scroll. Names were called. Children stumbled forward, some trembling, some trying to look brave. The hat was placed on their heads, covering their eyes, and after a moment it shouted a house. Cheer erupted. "Evans? Lily." Lily's fingers squeezed Severus for a heartbeat before she stepped forward. She walked like she was marching into battle. The hat covered her hair. The hall held its breath. "Gryffindor," it roared. The Gryffindor table exploded with applause and stamping. Lily pulled the hat off, cheeks flushed, eyes shining. She glanced at Severus, and her smile was a blade of pure joy. She ran to the Gryffindor table and slid onto a bench, making space instinctively beside her, saving it. Severus's stomach twisted. Of course. Lily was Gryffindor. He told himself it didn't matter. They could still be friends across houses. They could still meet in corridors, in the library. It would be fine. But then he heard McGonagall again. Snape, Severus. The hall seemed to tilt. Severus stepped forward, knees oddly light. The stool waited. He sat. McGonagall lowered the hat over his eyes, and the world went dark and smelled of dust. A voice spoke directly into his mind, dry and old. "Ah, another one." Severus's breath caught. He wanted to answer, but he didn't know how. Plenty of cunning, the hat mused. Plenty of ambition. A sharp mind. A sharper tongue. Slytherin would welcome. Yes, I can feel how you want it. Severus's heart hammered. Yes, Slytherin. But then the hat's tone shifted like a finger pressing on a bruise. And yet, there's something else. Something fierce. A loyalty that burns like a curse. A willingness to stand alone. You've had to be brave in ways you don't recognize. Severus's throat tightened. Brave? No, he thought. Desperate. Not brave. Not that. He had survived. That wasn't bravery. Survival is often the first courage, the hat replied, and Severus felt exposed, as if the hat had stripped him to bone. You want Slytherin because you think it will keep you safe. But safety isn't what you need. Not if you mean to become more than what was made for you. Severus's palms went slick. He pictured green banners, the dark relief of belonging. He pictured Lily at Gryffindor's table, her saved space like an accusation. Please, he thought, though he didn't know if the hat listened to please. Slytherin. The hat paused. Then, you could do great things there, it admitted. And you could be swallowed. You would let resentment guide you, because resentment is familiar. But there is another path. Harder. Brighter. One that would force you to choose courage every day. Severus's chest ached. He didn't want harder. He didn't want brighter. He wanted somewhere he could breathe. The hat seemed almost gentle, or as gentle as an ancient mind could be. Where you are placed is not who you are, it said. But where you are placed will test who you might become. Severus heard the hall's murmurs, distant, impatient. He felt time slipping. And then the hat shouted, loud enough for the whole world to hear. Gryffindor! The word hit Severus like a slap. For a heartbeat there was stunned silence, as if even the candles had paused. Then Gryffindor erupted. Cheers, whoops, pounding on the table. Severus's ears rang. Across the hall, the Slytherin table looked bewildered, some faces tightening into sneers as if insulted by the hat's decision. Severus pulled the hat off with hands that didn't feel like his own. He stood on legs that wanted to buckle. Lily was already on her feet, clapping fiercely, her smile wide enough to break the world. She was saving space, still saving space, as if she'd known all along. Severus walked toward her on a river of noise, and in his chest something cracked open. Not joy, not exactly, but a raw, frightened kind of possibility. He sat beside Lily because there was nowhere else to go, and because her shoulder against his was the only steady thing in a hall that suddenly felt too bright. At the staff table, Albus watched him over steepled fingers, eyes twinkling with a kind of knowing that made Severus' skin crawl. Severus stared down at his empty plate and wondered what it meant to be a lion when you had never learned how not to flinch. Feast blurred into a parade of plates and voices. Food appeared as if conjured from hunger itself. Roast meats, steaming potatoes, bread that tore warm in the hand. Lily ate with bright-eyed delight, asking questions about everything, laughing when a pudding wobbled into a shape that looked like a tiny dragon. Severus ate too because the food was real and his body demanded it, but his mind kept circling the same thought like a moth around flame. Gryffindor. He could feel Slytherin's gaze from across the hall, their curiosity sharpening into something colder. He could feel James and Sirius at the Gryffindor table as well, their earlier mocking now threaded with a new kind of interest. Like boys who had been handed an unexpected toy and were deciding how hard they could throw it. When the feast ended, the students rose in a thunder of movement. Prefects called out instructions. Severus followed with Lily in the crush, climbing staircases that shifted beneath their feet, passing suits of armor that creaked as if alive, portraits that whispered and watched. They stopped before a painting of a very fat lady in a pink silk dress. She blinked at the crowd of Gryffindors with theatrical patience. "Password," she demanded. A tall boy with a prefect badge said, "Fortuna Major." The fat lady swung open like a door, and warmth spilled out. The crackle of a fire, the hum of conversation, the smell of wood smoke and old books. The Gryffindor common room was circular, cozy in a way Severus hadn't known rooms could be. Deep armchairs clustered around the hearth. Red and gold tapestries hung from the walls. A broad window looked out onto darkness. Lily's face softened with relief. "It's lovely." Severus tried to let himself feel it too. But the moment he stepped inside, he sensed it. He was not simply in the room. He was in the room as an intrusion. People looked, whispered. A few smiled politely at Lily. Their gazes slid off Severus like he was grease on water. A prefect pointed the first years towards spiral stairs. The girls went one way, boys another. Lily squeezed Severus' hand quickly before separating. "Good night," she said, and her voice steadied him more than it should have. Severus climbed the stairs with the other boys, his trunk bumping each step. The dormitory door swung inward to reveal a circular room with 5-4 posters hung with red curtains. Trunks were already scattered. Someone had claimed the bed nearest the window, tossing his cloak onto it like a flag. James looked up when Severus entered, his glasses catching the lamplight. Sirius turned too, and his grin widened in slow, delighted malice. "Well," Sirius drawled, "look who followed us." James' eyebrows rose, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. "You're in here?" Severus set his trunk down hard enough to make the floorboards thump. "Obviously." Peter, small, round-faced with watery eyes, flinched. He hovered near his own trunk like he wasn't sure whether to unpack or hide inside it. Remus sat on the edge of a bed, a book already open in his hands. He looked up and his gaze was calm. Not friendly exactly, but not cruel. "It's 5 beds," Remus said quietly, like he was stating a fact no one could argue with. "So, yes, he's in here." Sirius laughed. "Brilliant. Our own little dungeon rat in Gryffindor Tower." Severus's jaw clenched. He reached for his trunk latch, hands shaking with contained fury. He forced his fingers to be precise. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him flustered. James leaned back against his bedpost, arms folded. "Thought you wanted Slytherin." Severus didn't look up. "It's not up to me." "Oh," Sirius said, mock sympathy dripping from the word. "Rejected, were you?" Severus's vision flashed with white. The coiled power inside him stirred, hungry. He imagined Sirius's mouth sealed shut, imagined James' smug posture broken by surprise. But he did not yet have a wand. None of them did. Their wands were in their trunks, wrapped in paper, sacred and dangerous. Severus could feel his through the wood like a heartbeat. Remus's gaze flicked between them. "Leave it," he said softly, but there was steel under the gentleness. Sirius ignored him. He stepped closer to Severus' trunk, leaning in as if to inspect. "So what's your plan then? Try to infiltrate Gryffindor and poison our porridge?" James snorted. Peter gave a nervous little laugh that sounded like a squeak. Severus's hand stilled on the trunk lid. Slowly, he looked up. His eyes met Sirius, and he let every ounce of his contempt show. "My plan," he said, voice flat, "is to study. Something you might try." James' grin sharpened. "Careful," he said. "You might get yourself hexed." Severus held his stare. "That would require you to learn a spell." For a moment, the room held its breath. Sirius' eyes darkened. James' hand twitched toward his trunk. Then Remus closed his book with a soft thump. "For Merlin's sake," he murmured, and there was weariness in it that didn't belong to an 11-year-old. "We're here. We're sorted. We've got 7 years. Do we really want to start by tearing each other apart on the first night?" "Nay." Sirius scoffed, but he stepped back. James shrugged like it didn't matter, like conflict was just another game. "Fine," he said. "But if he starts anything..." Severus turned away. He unpacked with rigid care, folding his few clothes into the narrow wardrobe, setting his books in a neat stack. His hands moved quickly, efficiently. He made his space small, controlled. A fortress inside a room that wasn't his. When he finally drew his wand from its box, dark wood, smooth, warm as skin, he held it for a moment in the privacy of his own curtain. The world tightened around that thin length of power. He had been sorted into Gryffindor. He did not feel brave. But as he lay down and listened to James and Sirius whispering and laughing in the dark, he realized something with a cold clarity that settled into his bones. If he was going to survive this, he would have to become something sharper than their cruelty. Outside the window, the castle wind moaned along the stones like an old ghost. Severus closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind them the word Gryffindor burned, not like warmth, but like a challenge. Morning came too fast. Severus woke to the sound of laughter and bed springs creaking, to Sirius humming a tuneless song under his breath just to be irritating. He dressed quickly, pulling his robes on with movements that were almost violent. He refused to be slow, refused to be seen fumbling. They spilled into the common room and down into the castle's arteries, corridors that smelled of cold stone and melted wax. The portraits were yawning awake. A suit of armor clanked as they passed, and Peter jumped like it had threatened him. The great hall was brighter in daylight, though the enchanted ceiling still showed a pale sky with thin clouds. Frost laced the windows. The air smelled of porridge, toast, and something rich. Bacon, probably. Owls swept overhead, dropping letters and packages into outstretched hands. Severus sat beside Lily because she patted the bench and smiled like he belonged there. He couldn't bring himself to refuse her. He didn't deserve her kindness, and yet he took it greedily. Lily talked about everything at once. The shifting stairs, the ghosts she'd glimpsed in the corridor, the way the plates refilled themselves. She was so alive that it almost hurt to watch. Severus ate porridge in careful spoonfuls. Across the table, James and Sirius sat with Remus and Peter. Already a cluster, already a small kingdom. James' hair stuck up in the back like he hadn't bothered to tame it. Sirius looked as if he'd stepped out of a portrait of someone important, chin lifted, eyes amused. James caught Severus looking and grinned. He leaned toward Sirius and said something that made Sirius laugh, and Peter laughed too loudly. Remus didn't join in. He kept his eyes on his toast, though Severus saw his mouth twitch as if he were fighting a smile. Lily noticed Severus' stillness. "Ignore them," she said quietly. Severus's gaze stayed on his bowl. "I am." Lily's voice lowered further. "You're shaking." Severus tightened his grip on the spoon until his knuckles hurt. "It's cold." Lily didn't believe him, but she didn't press. Instead, she reached across and shoved a plate of bacon toward him with brisk authority. "He ate," she ordered. "You look like you'll faint." He didn't want to take anything from her. He took it anyway. After breakfast, first years were herded toward their first classes by older students who seemed to delight in shouting directions. "Transfiguration's up there." "No, not that staircase. Are you thick?" "Charms is on the 3rd floor, unless the 3rd floor had moved again, which it probably has." Severus and Lily ended up in a crowd moving toward the dungeons for potions. The air grew cooler as they descended, the stone damp. Torches burned along the walls, their flames steady, casting shadows that made the corridors look like old scars. Severus felt a strange comfort the deeper they went. The castle above was warm, noisy, full of people. Down here, the air was quiet, the stone closer, the world narrower. It reminded him, too much, of Spinner's End. But it also reminded him of focus, of the place in his mind where he could be sharp and calm. They reached a heavy wooden door. A murmur ran through the class as students filed in. The potions classroom smelled of herbs and bitter roots, of metal and smoke. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with jars, things floating in clear liquid, things shriveled and preserved. Cauldrons sat on long tables, black and waiting. At the front stood a plump man with a shiny bald head and a walrus mustache. His eyes were bright, appraising. He smiled like someone about to choose sweets from a shop window. He boomed. "First years. Welcome. Welcome to potions. I am Professor Slughorn." Severus's stomach tightened. Slughorn's gaze swept over them, lingering on faces, as if he were measuring potential like gold. "Now," Slughorn continued, clapping his hands, "potions is not merely stirring and chanting. It is a subtle science and exact art. Some of you will not believe this is magic at all." Severus listened with a fierce hunger. Here. This was something he could master. Something that didn't require smiling or being liked. It required precision, knowledge, control. Slughorn paired them off. Lily ended up with a Ravenclaw girl. Severus was placed with Peter, who looked terrified of his own hands. Severus didn't mind. He preferred not to work with Lily. Not because he didn't want her near, but because he didn't want her seeing him fail. They were instructed to brew a simple cure for boils. The recipe was on the board. The ingredients were laid out: nettles, dried snake fangs, porcupine quills. Peter stared at the instructions, lips moving as he read. It says cut the fangs. How small? Small, Severus snapped, already slicing with swift efficiency. His knife moved like it belonged in his hand. He crushed the fangs into powder, measured precisely, stirred in time, watching the mixture's color shift. Peter tried to mimic him, but his hands shook. He spilled nettles. The cauldron hissed. "Stop," Severus said, grabbing Peter's wrist before he could dump in too much. "You'll ruin it." Peter stared at him, eyes wide. "Sorry. I'm sorry." Severus released him, disgusted by the softness of the apology. "Just watch." Their potion settled into a smooth, glossy blue. Severus felt a small, sharp satisfaction. He'd done it. He'd made something right. Slughorn waddled down the aisle, peering into cauldrons. He praised a few, chuckled at failures. When he reached Severus's table, he leaned in. "Well, well," Slughorn said, eyes widening. Very good indeed. Who's responsible for this beauty?" Severus's mouth went dry. "I, Peter," to Severus's shock, squeaked. "He is, sir. Severus." Slughorn's gaze locked on Severus. It was like being pinned. "Snape, is it? Severus Snape. Excellent. Tell me, boy, have you brewed before?" "A little," Severus said stiffly. "A little?" Slughorn laughed. "Modesty, too. Charming. Keep this up, Mr. Snape. Potions rewards the dedicated." Severus felt heat creep up his neck, but it wasn't humiliation this time. It was something like pride. Something like power. Across the room, James was watching. His potion had turned an alarming shade of green and was spitting. Sirius' cauldron smoked ominously. James' expression tightened as Slughorn praised Severus. The grin James gave afterward was too bright to be friendly. Severus held James' gaze without blinking. If James wanted a fight, Severus thought, then Severus would give him one. On the battlefield, he understood best. When class ended, Lily caught up to him in the corridor, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Sev, Slughorn liked yours." "Me." Severus nodded, trying to act as if it didn't matter. It mattered. Lily beamed. "I knew you'd be brilliant." Behind them, footsteps echoed. James and Sirius emerged with their own group, laughing loudly. James' shoulder brushed Severus as he passed. Not quite an accident. "Careful," James murmured, voice low enough that only Severus could hear. "Wouldn't want you getting too proud." Severus's hand tightened around his bag strap. "Pride's for people who have nothing else." James' smile faltered just a fraction, as if Severus had said something that didn't fit the game. Then Sirius slung an arm around James, and the moment vanished into laughter. Lily frowned after them. "They're insufferable." Severus looked down the damp corridor, torchlight trembling on stone. He felt the castle pressing in, ancient, watching, waiting. Gryffindor wanted bravery. Slytherin wanted ambition. Severus, trapped between them, wanted only one thing: not to be small anymore. The library smelled of ink and old paper, of leather bindings and dust warmed by sun. Light slanted through tall windows, striping the long tables. The silence was not empty. It was thick with whispered pages turning with the scratch of quills, with the occasional sharp shh from Madame Pince that made first years jump. Severus loved it immediately. Here, there were rules, but they were rules he understood. Keep your voice low. Treat the books with respect. Ask questions with precision. Do not waste time. He sat at a corner table with a stack of texts that looked absurd beside his thin arms. He'd already finished his assigned readings for most classes. The first-year material felt like a locked door he'd discovered was only latched. He turned pages quickly, scanning for things that mattered: properties, reactions, warnings written in cramped, old handwriting. When he found something new, his mind snapped around it like a trap closing. The coiled power in his chest, magic he supposed, settled when he read. It was as if knowledge gave it a shape. A shadow fell across the page. Severus stiffened, already expecting Sirius' grin or James' mockery. Instead, it was Lily. She slid into the seat opposite him, cheeks pink from the warmth of the castle. Her hair looked like a flame against the library's brown quiet. She set down her own books with reverent care, copying the way he handled his. "I thought I'd find you here," she whispered. Severus kept his eyes on the page, but his mouth softened. "Why?" "Because you're you." Lily smiled, and then her expression shifted, becoming thoughtful. "Are you all right? You've been so tense." "No, I'm telling. It's Severus's quill hovered above the margin where he was making notes. He didn't know how to answer without handing her something ugly. He didn't want to burden her with the dormitory, with the way James and Sirius took up space like they were entitled to it, with the constant sense of being measured and found lacking. "I'm fine," he said, which was the first lie he'd ever told Lily without regret. Lily studied him. "You were right about the library, you know. It's brilliant." Severus allowed himself a small nod. "Of course it is." Lily pulled a parchment from her bag. "Potions homework," she whispered. "Slughorn wants us to write about the properties of, what are they called? Bezoars." Severus's eyes flicked up, sharp. "Bezoars neutralize most poisons." Lily's eyebrows rose. "How do you know that already?" Severus looked down again. "I read." Lily's smile turned teasing. "You read like it's breathing." Severus felt heat prick his face. He hated that she could make him feel exposed with kindness. "You talk like it's breathing," he muttered. Lily laughed silently, shoulders shaking. For a moment, the world was only ink and paper and Lily's laughter like a secret light. Then Madame Pince's voice cut across the room. "Mr. Potter, if you cannot treat this library with respect, you will leave." Severus's head snapped up. At the far end, James stood with Sirius, both of them trying and failing to look innocent. James held a book upside down as if he'd been pretending to read. Sirius' grin was unapologetic. "Sorry," James said in a tone that made it clear he wasn't. Sirius nudged him and they turned away, snickering, leaving behind an atmosphere of disruption like footprints in snow. Severus's jaw tightened. Lily noticed. "They're everywhere," she whispered, irritation sharpening her voice. "I don't know why everyone thinks they're so funny." Severus's gaze followed James and Sirius until they disappeared behind shelves. "Because they're loud," he said. "And people mistake loud for important." Lily's eyes softened. "You're important." Severus's throat tightened so suddenly he almost coughed. He bent his head over his book, pretending to read harder. "Don't be stupid." Lily leaned forward, voice barely audible. "Sev, do you regret it? Being in Gryffindor, I mean." Severus's fingers clenched on the edge of the page. He thought of the hat's voice, of the word it had shouted. He thought of Jameson's smirk. Serious laughter. The way Slytherin stared at him like he was a mistake that had wandered into the wrong corridor. And he thought of Lily's hand squeezing his. Lily saving him space. "I don't know," he said honestly, because Lily deserved at least one truth. "I didn't choose it." "No," Lily agreed. "But you're here." Severus swallowed. "Yes." Lily reached across the table and touched his knuckles briefly, lightly, like she was reminding him he existed. Then she pulled back quickly, as if she'd realized the gesture might be too intimate in a room full of watching silence. Severus stared at his own hand for a moment, feeling the ghost of her warmth. The library's quiet pressed in again. He returned to his book. He read until the words blurred slightly, until he could pretend the world was made only of things that could be understood and mastered. But even as he copied notes, even as he chased knowledge like a starving thing, he could feel the truth gnawing beneath his ribs. In Gryffindor, courage wasn't a story people told about you. It was a choice you made when you were tired, when you were angry, when you were alone. And Severus had never been more alone in his life. Severus left the library when the light began to thin behind the tall windows, when the last warm stripes on the tables turned the color of old parchment. He packed his books with the same meticulous care he used for his cauldron ingredients, stacking them so the spines lined up, smoothing the corner of his parchment as if neatness might protect him from the world's teeth. Lily walked with him to the doors, still talking in a hushed rush about a charm she'd mastered on the first try, about a portrait of a wizard who tried to pinch her cheek as she passed. She was glowing, the way she always seemed to glow in this place, as if Hogwarts fed her some secret fuel. "You could come to the common room and revise with us," she said as they stepped into the corridor. "I mean, if you want us." Severus pictured James and Sirius sprawled in armchairs like they owned the fire, Peter laughing too loudly at nothing, older Gryffindors turning their heads away when he passed. He pictured every glance sliding off Lily and sticking on him. "I've got work," he said. Lily's smile tightened, but she didn't argue. "All right," she whispered, "but don't stay up all night." He gave a non-committal grunt and turned away before she could see too much. The castle's corridors shifted from the hush of the library into a livelier current. Footsteps on stone, laughter echoing, voices carrying around corners. Severus kept to the edges where the torches cast more shadow than light. Portraits followed him with their eyes. Some muttered. One old witch sniffed as he passed and said, "He looks like trouble," in a voice meant to be heard. He climbed toward Gryffindor Tower with his bag heavy against his hip. The closer he got, the more his stomach tightened. The portrait of the fat lady waited like a judgment. The corridor outside her frame was empty at first, only the rustle of a tapestry in the draught. Severus slowed, suspicious. Silence in Hogwarts was rarely innocent. "Fortuna Major," said a voice behind him. Severus froze. The fat lady swung open, complaining loudly about drafts, and James Potter stepped through as if he'd been summoned by the sound of his own name. Sirius Black followed, hands in his pockets, an expression of amused boredom fixed on his face. Severus's fingers tightened on his bag strap. He didn't turn fully. He didn't give them his front. James's gaze flicked down to Severus' stack of books. "Been swatting again?" he asked lightly. "Thought you might be doing something interesting for once." "Studying is interesting," Severus said, keeping his voice flat. Sirius made a thoughtful sound. "Is it? You'd have to be desperate to think so." James stepped closer, blocking the corridor with casual confidence. "So," he said, "how's it feel, being stuck with us?" Severus lifted his chin. "Fine. Fine," Sirius echoed as if tasting the word. "He says fine as though anyone believes him." James' grin widened. "You know, you could still try for Slytherin friends. It's not like Gryffindor is going to claim you." Severus's pulse thudded hard. The hat's voice whispered in his mind, harder, brighter, like mockery. He forced his mouth into a thin line. "Move." Sirius leaned in, close enough that Severus could see a faint, pale scar at the corner of his lip, like a childhood accident that had healed wrong. "Or what?" Sirius murmured. Severus's mind leapt to spells like a cornered animal. He didn't want to fight. He wanted them gone. But his chest burned with humiliation, with the old familiar feeling of being pinned and laughed at. James' hand drifted toward his robe pocket where his wand would be. "Come on," James said, voice still light. "Do something clever." Severus heard Lily's voice from earlier, "Ignore them." And something in him snapped at the word ignore. Ignore meant endure. Ignore meant swallow. He'd swallowed his whole life. He pulled his wand so fast the wood almost scraped his knuckles raw. It felt hotter than the corridor air, like it had been waiting. Sirius' eyebrows lifted in delighted surprise. James's grin sharpened. Severus didn't hesitate. Locomotor mortis. The words punched out of him like a cough. James' legs snapped together as if bound by invisible rope. His expression changed from amusement to shock so fast it was almost satisfying. He toppled sideways, catching himself on the wall, glasses askew. For half a heartbeat the corridor was silent. Then Sirius laughed. A bright, vicious bark. "Oh, that's rich." Sirius' wand flashed. Severus didn't hear the incantation, only saw the motion. Something struck his bag strap, yanking it. The bag flew out of his hand and thudded against the floor, books spilling, parchment sliding like scattered feathers. Severus's stomach dropped. It wasn't the spill that hurt. It was the humiliation of it, the way his careful order came undone in an instant. James wrestled his legs, face flushing with anger. "Finite," he spat, and the binding loosened with a jerk. He straightened, shaking himself like a dog coming out of water. Eyes now cold. "You little..." he began. A sharp click of heels cut through the corridor. All three of them froze. Professor McGonagall appeared around the corner, her tartan robes whispering against the stone. Her eyes took in the scene with terrifying speed. James stiff with anger, Sirius smirking. Severus crouched over spilled books with his wand still raised. "Mr. Potter," she said, voice like a blade. "Mr. Black. Mr. Snape." No one spoke. Even the portraits held their tongues. McGonagall's gaze rested on Severus' wand. "Put that away." Severus's fingers felt numb as he lowered his wand and tucked it into his robe. He forced himself to begin gathering his books, though his hands trembled. A quill snapped under his palm. He swallowed a curse. McGonagall's mouth thinned. "Explain." James opened his mouth, confidence returning like a cloak. "He attacked me," he said, pointing at Severus as if Severus were a creature had discovered in a cupboard. "Out of nowhere." Severus looked up sharply. "You were blocking the corridor." Sirius shrugged. "We were talking," he said, all innocence. "He hexed James because he can't take a joke." McGonagall's eyes flicked to Sirius. "A joke?" Sirius' grin didn't falter. "Yes, Professor." McGonagall's gaze returned to Severus. There was no warmth in her expression, but there was something else, an assessing sharpness, as though she were weighing him. "Mr. Snape," she said, "the leg locker curse is not part of the first-year curriculum." Severus's cheeks burned. "I read ahead." "That," McGonagall said, "is not an excuse for using hexes on your fellow students in the corridor." Severus's mouth opened, but no words came. He had no defense that didn't sound like weakness. McGonagall turned her gaze on James and Sirius. "And you two," she said, voice colder still, "have been in this castle for less than a fortnight, and already I see the beginnings of a pattern I do not like." James swallowed, his grin gone. Sirius' eyes narrowed. "You will all come with me," McGonagall said. Severus's stomach clenched. He stood, scooping the last of his books into his bag with clumsy haste. His fingers fumbled over a loose parchment. He wanted to vanish into the stone. McGonagall marched them down corridors that seemed longer under her silence, past students who flattened themselves against the walls to avoid being in her path. She took them to her office, a high room with tall windows and a smell of parchment and sternness. She made them stand before her desk like criminals. "You," she said to James and Sirius, "will each lose 5 points from Gryffindor for loitering where you should not have been and for provoking a conflict." James' jaw tightened. Sirius' eyes flashed, but he said nothing. McGonagall turned to Severus. Severus's heart sank. "Mr. Snape," she said, "you will lose 10 points." Losing points felt like a physical blow. It wasn't the number. It was the certainty of what it would mean when they returned to the tower. Whispers, anger, the word traitor, in mouths too young to know its weight. McGonagall's voice softened by a fraction, but it did not become kind. "Because," she added, "you chose to respond with a hex rather than to walk away or seek help." Severus stared at the floor, jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. "And," McGonagall continued, "you will have a detention with Mr. Filch on Saturday." James made a sound of protest. "Professor." McGonagall's eyes snapped to him. "Not another word, Mr. Potter." They were dismissed in stony silence. The walk back to the tower was worse than the march to her office. Every portrait seemed to lean in, hungry for gossip. Severus kept his eyes down. He could feel James and Sirius behind him like knives at his back, but they said nothing. Their silence felt like promise. When the fat lady swung open and the common room warmth spilled out, Severus hesitated on the threshold. Conversations faltered as people noticed the three of them together. The tightness of their faces. Someone whispered, "McGonagall," like a curse. An older Gryffindor, broad-shouldered, freckles across his nose, stood up from an armchair. "What'd you do?" he demanded, eyes snapping to James and Sirius. James's gaze flicked, and for a heartbeat Severus thought James might say the truth. But James' eyes landed on Severus and hardened. "Ask him," James said, voice loud enough to carry. "He cost us points." Severus's stomach lurched. Voices rose. "What? How many? Snape, are you mental?" Someone muttered, "Bloody Slytherin," as if the word explained everything. Severus's skin prickled with heat and shame. He opened his mouth, but the room seemed to press down on his throat. Lily pushed through the crowd, her face flushed, eyes fierce. "What happened?" she demanded. James opened his mouth, but Lily's glare made him hesitate. Severus forced the words out. "They cornered me," he said, voice low. They were joking," Sirius cut in smoothly, leaning back against the wall with infuriating ease. He hexed James. Lily's gaze flicked between them, suspicion sharpening. "What kind of joke?" Sirius smiled. "The kind you wouldn't understand." Lily's hands curled into fists. "Try me." Severus watched her, something tight in his chest twisting. Lily was brave. Lily would fight for him, and he would repay her by dragging her into this ugliness until it stained her too. He stepped back, away from the circle of faces. "It doesn't matter," he muttered. Lily grabbed his sleeve. "It does matter." Severus looked down at her hand on his robe, at the stubborn grip. "It's done," he said, and pulled away gently before his voice could crack. He climbed the boys' staircase 2 steps at a time, leaving the common room noise behind. Behind his curtain, he sat on his bed with his bag open beside him, books scattered in uneven piles. 10 points. Detention. He pressed his fists into his eyes until he saw stars. In the darkness behind his eyelids, the Sorting Hat's voice seemed to murmur again, not as prophecy, but as accusation. Harder. Brighter. Severus opened his eyes and stared at his wand lying on the quilt like a thin, sleeping snake. If bravery was a choice, he thought bitterly, then tonight he had chosen wrong. And yet, beneath the shame, something else moved. Small, stubborn, alive. He had not let them laugh at him without consequence. He had done something. He didn't know whether that made him foolish or brave. He only knew he could not go back to being harmless. Next morning, the sky was a hard, pale blue, the kind that looks scrubbed clean by cold. Gryffindors and Slytherins filed out onto the lawn in a mixed knot of red and green, breath smoking in the air. The grass glittered with dew. Somewhere above, an owl called once, sharp and lonely. Severus kept close to Lily as they walked. The stairs from the common room the night before still clung to his skin like damp. Someone had hissed 10 points as he passed the portrait hole, as if numbers could become bruises. Flying lessons, he told himself. Something simple. Something physical. Something he could endure without talking. Rows of brooms lay on the ground like fallen twigs. The sight of them tightened something in Severus's chest. He had never ridden anything that moved faster than a bus. The idea of being lifted into open air, away from walls and corners, made his stomach turn. Madame Hooch strode before them, her yellow eyes bright under a shock of short gray hair. Her whistle hung at her throat like a threat. "Welcome," she said crisply. "Now, stand beside a broom. Put your right hand over it. Say, up." Severus stood beside a broom that looked old and splintered at the handle. He held his hand above it, palm down. The broom felt like a test, waiting to see if he would flinch. "Up," he said quietly. Nothing happened. Around him, brooms began to jump into hands. James Potter's broom shot up as if thrilled to obey him. James caught it one-handed, grinning at Sirius. Sirius' broom leapt too, and he twirled it, showing off, receiving admiring laughter from other boys. Severus's broom lay stubbornly still, as if it despised him. "Up," Severus repeated, sharper. The broom quivered, twitched, then rolled an inch as though in reluctant surrender. It did not leap. A snort sounded behind him. "Maybe it knows you're not worth lifting." Severus didn't turn. He knew the voice. Mulciber, thin, pale, with eyes that always looked half amused, stood with a broom in his hand, green trim bright against his robes. Avery lingered beside him, broad-faced and smug. Mulciber's gaze slid over Severus like slime. "Should been in our house," he said, as if offering a favor. "Slytherin would have appreciated someone who can actually do magic." Severus's fingers tightened. "I can do magic," he snapped, and hated that his voice had risen. Mulciber's smile widened. "Can you? Looks like the broom disagrees." Lily turned, eyes flashing. "Leave him alone." Mulciber looked her up and down with exaggerated politeness. "Evans," he said, and there was something pointed in the way he said it, like the name itself was a joke. "Didn't mean to offend." Severus felt heat crawl up his neck. He hated being defended like a child. He hated needing it. Madame Hook's whistle shrilled. "Enough. Hold your brooms. When I blow the whistle, you will kick off from the ground and hover. Do not—" Her yellow eyes swept the line, pausing on James and Sirius. "Do not fly until I tell you." Severus gripped his broom. The wood was cold beneath his palm. The whistle blew. All along the line, students kicked off. Brooms rose a few feet, wobbling. Severus's broom lurched beneath him as if shocked by his weight. His stomach dropped. For a second, his feet left the ground and the earth became far away in a way that made his throat close. He clung to the broom handle until his fingers hurt. The broom hovered, trembling, as if unsure whether to keep him. "Balance," Madame Hook called. "Relax your grip." Relax, Severus thought wildly, as if relaxation were something you could order like tea. James glided past him, a foot higher, pretending it was effortless. "Try not to fall," James said, grin bright. "Wouldn't want to scrape you off the grass." Severus's broom wobbled harder at the sound, as if sharing his anger. He forced his breathing to slow, to find the tight center of himself he used in potions, the place where panic couldn't reach. The broom steadied. Severus's heartbeat thudded in his ears. He was up. He was not falling. The air bit his cheeks and made his eyes water. Below, the grass looked strangely delicate. Madame Hook's whistle blew again. Back to the ground. Severus lowered, clumsy but controlled. His feet hit earth and relief surged so hard his knees almost buckled. A shriek tore the air. Severus jerked his head up in time to see a small boy, one of the Hufflepuffs, round-faced and terrified, shoot upward too fast. His broom had bolted like a frightened horse. The boy's hands slipped. His scream rose, thin and helpless. Madame Hook swore under her breath and ran, but the boy was already tumbling. He hit the ground with a sickening crack and rolled, clutching his wrist, sobbing. Students surged forward, shouting. Madame Hook knelt, her face tight. "Broken," she muttered, and then louder, "Nobody move. I'm taking him to the hospital wing. If I see anyone in the air, anyone at all, you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch." Her gaze speared James and Sirius in particular. James, for once, looked chastened. Madame Hook guided the sobbing boy away. The class clustered in uneasy groups, murmuring. Severus stood apart, broom on the grass beside him. His fingers still tingled from gripping it. He watched the boy disappear through the doors, stomach soured. Sirius leaned close to James, whispering. James' eyes flicked to a small object on the ground, A silver chain with a glass pendant dropped near where the boy had fallen. A reminder, maybe. A keepsake. James' face lit with that same reckless spark Severus had seen on the platform at King's Cross. Before Severus could even understand what James was about to do, James mounted his broom and kicked off. "James!" someone hissed. James shot upward, fast, swooping toward the pendant, as if the rules were only suggestions. Sirius' laugh rang out, delighted, and for a heartbeat, Severus was certain Sirius would follow. James leaned low, fingers stretching toward the chain. Severus felt something cold and hard settle inside him. If the boy's broom could bolt, so could James. If James fell, it would be broken bones and blood on the grass, and everyone would look at Gryffindor and see stupidity. Before he could talk himself out of it, Severus mounted his own broom. The handle bucked under him, displeased. His stomach lurched. He kicked off anyway, lungs tightening as the ground fell away. He rose lower than James, but he rose. The wind slapped his face. The castle seemed to loom around him, ancient and indifferent. James was already diving, chasing the glint of the pendant. Severus forced his broom forward, heart hammering. He hated this, hated the open air, the exposure, the way the world had no walls up here. But he pushed through it like pushing through nettles, stinging necessary. "Potter!" he shouted, and his voice was torn away by wind. James glanced back, surprise flashing across his face. "What are you doing?" he yelled. Severus didn't answer. He aimed his broom beneath James's path, positioning himself where he could if he had to. Shove James' broom upward, steady it, anything. He didn't know if he could. He only knew he had to try. James' fingers closed around the pendant chain. For a moment it dangled from his hand, catching the sun. Then James's broom jerked violently, as if offended by his sudden lean. James swore, wobbling. Severus's blood turned to ice. He thrust his broom upward instinctively, shoulder brushing James' knee. The contact steadied James by a fraction. James' broom recovered, wobble settling. James stared down at Severus, expression tight, shock in his eyes. For a heartbeat they hovered there, two boys suspended above the lawn. One grinning recklessly, the other pale with fear and fury. "Get down," Severus snarled. James' mouth twitched as if he wanted to laugh, even now. But something in Severus's face must have stopped him. James nodded sharply. They descended. Severus's broom fought him the whole way, but he forced it to obey. His feet hit the grass with a jolt that went up his knees. James landed beside him more gracefully, pendant chain wrapped around his fist. The corridor doors banged open. Madame Hooch stormed back onto the lawn, her eyes taking in the scene. Two brooms on the ground, two boys with flushed faces, students staring like they'd witnessed something sacred or stupid. "Potter," she said, and her voice could have frozen the lake. "Snape, my office, now." Serious laughter died in his throat. Lily's face was white. Severus stood very still, broom at his side. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. Fear still crawled under his skin, but beneath it was something stranger. A thin, fierce pride that he had mounted the broom again, that he had not let terror win. As he followed Madame Hooch toward the castle, he heard whispers behind him. Gryffindors and Slytherins alike, names tossed like stones. Potter, hero. Snape. Severus kept his eyes forward. He had no interest in being called anything at all, if it meant being seen. But he could not forget the moment James had looked down at him in midair, surprise cracking his confidence like glass. And for the first time Severus wondered, terrifyingly, if James Potter might actually be capable of something other than cruelty. The Charms classroom was high and bright, the air always faintly humming as if the very walls were itching to do something extraordinary. Tiny desks lined up in neat rows. A few charmed objects floated lazily near the ceiling. Paper cranes that circled each other, a quill that scribbled nonsense in the air, a teacup that poured itself forever without emptying. Professor Flitwick stood on a stack of books behind his desk so he could be seen. He was very small, with kind eyes, and a voice that carried surprisingly well. "Now then," he squeaked, clapping his hands. "Today we're going to attempt something. Something many of you have been looking forward to." Excited murmurs ran through the class. "Levitation," Flitwick announced, beaming. "The levitation charm. Proper wand movement is very important. Swish and flick, not." His eyes darted to a boy in the second row who was already waving his wand like a sword, not stab and jab. James Potter sat 2 desks away from Severus, leaning back in his chair with the air of someone who expected the spell to obey him out of gratitude. Sirius lounged beside him, chin propped on one hand, watching everything like it was a performance put on for his amusement. Lily sat in the row ahead, quill poised, taking notes with fierce concentration. Severus watched the precise way her wrist moved, then forced himself to look away. Flitwick demonstrated, wand flicking, and a feather on his desk rose as gently as breath. The class gasped as if they'd seen a miracle. "Now," Flitwick said, "pair up. One of you will attempt the charm, the other will observe and assist. Correct pronunciation is key. Wingardium Leviosa. Not Wingardium Leviosa," James whispered theatrically, making Sirius snort. Pairs formed quickly. Severus found himself with Peter again because Peter hovered uncertainly until Severus's sharp look made him shuffle over. Peter's face was pink with nervousness. "Right," Peter whispered. We say it, and swish and flick." Severus nodded once. He set the feather on the desk in front of them, aligned it with the edge as if placement mattered. It did in his mind. Everything did. He lifted his wand. The wood felt steady in his grip now, less like an alien thing and more like an extension of his fingers. He breathed in and found the tight, controlled place inside himself. "Wingardium Leviosa," he said. Swish. Flick. Ta. The feather trembled. For a heartbeat it resisted, as if testing him. Then it rose cleanly, hovering a foot above the desk, spinning slowly. Peter's mouth fell open. "You did it," he breathed. Severus held the feather aloft, jaw tight with satisfaction. It was simple, but it was proof. He lowered the feather gently back to the desk and glanced toward Flitwick. Flitwick's eyes were already on him. The professor's smile brightened. "Excellent control, Mr. Snape," he called. "Very good. That's it, gentle, precise, not too much force." Severus's chest warmed. The praise was public, undeniable. He felt it land in the room like a stone dropped in water, ripples spreading through glances and whispers. James' head turned sharply. His eyes narrowed behind his glasses. Sirius leaned toward him and murmured something that made James' jaw tighten. "Oi," Sirius said, voice pitched just loud enough to reach Severus. "Careful, Snape. Bah. Don't levitate yourself by accident. Might improve the view.eu. No. Wow." Peter made a nervous sound, half laugh, half whimper. Severus ignored them. He turned to Peter. "Your turn," he said curtly. Peter swallowed hard and raised his wand. Wingardium." His wand flicked too sharply. The feather spasmed, then shot upward like it had been fired from a bow, ricocheting off the ceiling with a faint thud and drifting down in a slow, ridiculous spiral. A few students giggled. Peter's ears went red. Sorry," he whispered. Severus's impatience flared. "Not like that," he hissed. Listen. Swish. Then flick. Not." James' laugh cut across the room, loud. "Brilliant," he said, eyes glittering. "Snape tutoring again. Maybe you can teach everyone how to be miserable." Severus's hand tightened on his wand. He glanced toward Lily. Her shoulders had gone stiff, but she didn't turn around. Severus couldn't tell if she was trying not to get involved or trying not to show she was listening. Flitwick continued to drift between desks, praising, correcting, beaming. The room filled with feathers wobbling and hovering, with small cheers and groans when things fell or flew wrong. Severus focused on Peter, forcing his voice to stay even. He was not going to give James the pleasure of seeing him snap. Peter tried again. This time the feather rose a few inches and hovered, wobbling like a drunk moth. Peter's face lit with relief. "That's better," Severus said grudgingly. A sudden tug yanked Severus' bag off the floor beside his chair. His book spilled again, pages fluttering. Severus's head snapped up. James sat across the aisle, wand pointed casually toward Severus' desk. His grin was wide and unapologetic. Severus felt heat surge. He could feel the eyes in the room turning, smell the laughter coming like smoke. Flitwick's back was turned. If Severus didn't respond, he would be laughed at. If he did, he would be punished. The choice clawed at him. He picked up his wand with deliberate calm. He moved his wrist in a small, precise motion, not a swish and flick, but something he'd read, something older students used to correct misbehaving objects. "Oh," he whispered, hardly thinking. The spilled quills on his desk sprang into the air like a flock of angry insects. They shot toward James, peppering his hair and robe, stabbing him with ink-stained tips. James yelped, batting at them, trying to shield his face. Sirius burst out laughing, but it came out sharp, surprised. "Get them off," James hissed, swatting, ink smearing his sleeve. The class erupted in laughter now, but not at Severus. At James. Severus felt a fierce, guilty thrill. Flitwick turned at the commotion, eyes widening. "Oh my, Mr. Potter, Mr. Snape, what is this?" The quills fell with a clatter as Severus lowered his wand. James stood, face flushed, hair stuck with ink. His glasses were smeared. He looked furious. Flitwick's small face hardened, which somehow made it more intimidating. "This is a classroom," he said, voice still gentle but edged with steel. "Not an arena." James opened his mouth to speak, but Flitwick held up a hand. "5 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Potter, for using levitation on another student's belongings." And his gaze moved to Severus. 5 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Snape, for retaliating with a charm beyond what we have covered. Severus's stomach clenched at the words 5 points, but he kept his face still. It was less than McGonagall had taken. It was also, in a twisted way, proof that James could bleed points too. Flitwick sighed, looking suddenly tired. "You are all very young," he said, "and you have much to learn. I do not want to see talent turned into cruelty. Do you understand?" A murmur of "yes, sir." Flitwick's eyes lingered on Severus for a moment longer than necessary. "Mr. Snape," he added softly, "you have a very quick mind. Remember that quickness can be used to build as well as to wound." Severus swallowed. He nodded once. When class ended, students filed out in a noisy stream. Feathers finally stilled. Lily waited by the door, arms folded. Her eyes flicked to Severus's ink-stained hands, then to James' smeared robe. "Seth," she said quietly as Severus reached her. "What did you do?" Severus lifted his chin. "He started it." Lily's mouth tightened. "And you finished it." He didn't deny it. He couldn't. James pushed past them, shoulder clipping Severus's. He didn't look at Lily, but his voice was low and hot. "You're going to regret that," he whispered to Severus. Severus watched him go, heart beating hard. He should have felt guilty. He did, somewhere under the surface. But above that guilt was a colder satisfaction. For once, James Potter had been the one laughed at, and Severus couldn't decide whether that made him feel powerful or poisoned. By the time October bled into the last day, Hogwarts had begun to smell like damp leaves and wood smoke. Pumpkins appeared overnight along corridors and on stair landings, their carved faces grinning in torchlight. Strings of floating candles were joined by drifting lanterns shaped like skulls that glowed a warm, harmless gold. Even the suits of armor seemed to lean in, as if listening for mischief. Severus had learned the shape of the castle's moods by then. On ordinary days, the corridors breathed quietly, occupied with the shuffle of lessons and the murmured gossip of portraits. On Halloween, the place felt alive with anticipation, like it was holding a secret between its stones. At dinner, the great hall glittered with enchanted decorations. Jack-o'-lanterns floated over the tables, their mouths opening and closing as though singing. Bats made of black paper fluttered under the starry ceiling, and every few minutes one would dive and brush a student's hair, eliciting shrieks and laughter. Ghosts drifted in thick clusters above the floor, translucent bodies tangling together like pale smoke. Nearly headless Nick executed a mournful bow at the Gryffindor table, his ruff waving. The fat friar floated past humming, cheerful even in death. Peeves swooped overhead, pelting grapes at first years until Professor McGonagall's glare sent him cackling into the rafters. Severus sat beside Lily, because Lily always made room, and because refusing her still felt like refusing the only bright thing he had. She wore her excitement openly, talking to Nick as if he were an eccentric uncle, laughing when his head wobbled on its ragged cut. "You'll see," Lily said, eyes shining. "It's just for fun. It's meant to be fun. May die." Severus looked around at Gryffindor students who seemed to know how to belong. He saw James across the table, animated, telling a story with his hands while Sirius grinned and leaned in. Peter laughed too loudly at the punchline. Remus's smile was smaller, quieter, but it was there. Severus was not part of their laughter. He was an island in the middle of it. The feast arrived in waves. Bowls of stew that smelled of herbs, platters of sausages, pies that steamed when cut. A cake shaped like a castle appeared, its tiny sugar towers toppling dramatically when sliced. Students cheered. The hall rang with noise. Severus ate enough to keep Lily from frowning at him. He did not taste much. Halfway through dinner, a low metallic clank echoed from somewhere beyond the doors, like chains dragged over stone. Severus's head lifted sharply. The sound threaded through the roar of the hall, cold and wrong. Lily didn't seem to notice. She was laughing at something Nick had said about dueling a knight in 1492. But Severus's skin prickled, his attention drawn like a needle to a magnet. Another clank, closer this time. He turned his head and saw him. The bloody Baron floated near the Slytherin table, a silent smear of darkness amid the candlelight. His chains wrapped around him like a punishment, clinking softly as he moved. Blood, real, dark, glistening, stained his ruff and his robes, streaming in slow motion from invisible wounds. Students near him leaned away instinctively. The Baron's eyes were empty pits. He seemed to look through everyone, as if life was a trivial distraction. Severus felt something twist inside him. Not fear exactly, but recognition. He knew what it was to carry stains you couldn't wash off, to be marked by things other people didn't want to see. The Baron drifted past, and for a heartbeat his gaze snagged on Severus. Severus's breath stopped. The Baron's expression didn't change. It barely had an expression. But Severus felt, with sudden certainty, that the ghost had noticed him. Not as a curiosity, as something familiar. He looked away quickly, heart pounding, as if he'd been caught staring at a wound. "Seth?" Lily nudged him lightly. "Where'd you go?" "Nothing," he muttered. The feast continued. Dumbledore rose at the staff table to give a few words, his voice warm, eyes twinkling. He spoke of unity, of safety, of remembering kindness even when you were tempted to be cruel. Students cheered at the end, as if kindness were a treat. Severus watched Dumbledore as he sat again, the candlelight catching in his beard. Dumbledore's gaze swept the hall, gentle and sharp at once. For a moment, Severus wondered if Dumbledore had seen him looking at the Baron, if the headmaster saw everything. When the feast ended, Gryffindors poured out toward their tower, buzzing with sugar and excitement. Someone had charmed the pumpkins in the corridor to belch sparks. Sirius laughed and tried to poke one with his wand. McGonagall appeared, and Sirius stepped back innocently. Severus slipped away before the noise could swallow him. He didn't know why he was moving alone. He only knew he needed air that wasn't full of laughter. He wandered down a corridor that grew quieter with each turn, away from the main flow of students. The torches burned lower here, shadows thick along the floor. Portraits dozed. A suit of armor stood hunched as if sleeping. Severus's footsteps echoed. His wand felt heavy in his pocket, a weight and a comfort. He turned a corner and stopped so suddenly his breath caught. The bloody Baron floated ahead of him, alone in the corridor. Chains dragged softly, the sound that had threaded through the feast. The Baron's head was bowed, as if he were listening to the stones. Severus stood very still, pulse pounding. He should have turned around. He should have run back to the lights. But his feet didn't move. The Baron lifted his head slowly, his hollow eyes fixed on Severus. A cold pressure settled in Severus's chest, like the moment before a potion boiled over. The Baron drifted closer without hurry. The corridor seemed to narrow around them. Severus's mouth went dry. "Sir," he whispered, because some part of him insisted on manners even in terror. The Baron didn't speak. Ghosts did speak. Nick certainly did. But the Baron's silence felt like a deliberate choice, like a refusal to waste words. Chains clinked as he moved. He stopped an arm's length away. Severus could see the dark smear of blood on his hands, the way it hung in the air as if gravity had forgotten it. The Baron lifted one pale hand. Severus flinched, expecting cold fingers, but the ghost's hand stopped short, hovering. In Severus's mind, without words, a sensation pressed. A question, maybe? A weight of expectation. Severus swallowed. He didn't understand it, but he answered in the only way he knew, by being honest. "I don't belong," he whispered. The Baron's chains shivered, a soft metallic sigh. For a moment, Severus thought he saw something like amusement flicker across the ghost's blank face. Then the Baron drifted past him, leaving behind the sharp scent of iron. Severus stood frozen until the sound of chains faded into silence. Only then did he breathe again, shaky and shallow. He should have been frightened. He was. But beneath the fear was a darker curiosity, a pull toward the things that frightened other people away. He walked back toward Gryffindor Tower slowly, mind buzzing. In the distance he could hear laughter again, voices echoing up staircases. He could imagine Lily sitting by the fire, waiting, wondering where he'd gone. Severus quickened his pace. When he reached the portrait hole, the fat lady was arguing with an older student about the password. Severus waited, silent, feeling the cold of the corridor still clinging to him. As he stepped into the common room warmth, he felt something else too. Something that made his skin crawl. Like eyes on him from somewhere he couldn't see. Like the castle itself had taken notice. And Severus, who had spent his whole life trying to be invisible, realized with a hollow jolt that being noticed could be its own kind of danger. The first Quidditch match of the year arrived with a wind that cut through robes and made noses go red. Students streamed out of the castle in a tide of color, scarves and mittens appearing as if conjured from thin air. The stands rose beside the pitch like steep stone cliffs, already roaring with chants long before the players took to the sky. Severus didn't understand Quidditch. The rules were a tangle of nonsense, and the way people spoke about it, like it was war, like it was religion, made him wary. But Lily had insisted. "It's part of it," she'd said, eyes bright. "It's Hogwarts." So Severus found himself in the Gryffindor section, pressed shoulder to shoulder with students who smelled of excitement and cold air. Someone shoved a red and gold scarf into his hands. He didn't put it on. He held it like an obligation. Lily perched on the bench beside him, cheeks flushed, her breath puffing white. "Just watch," she said, as if Quidditch could be understood by staring at it hard enough. James and Sirius sat a few rows down, already shouting themselves hoarse. Sirius had his hands cupped around his mouth, yelling at Gryffindor's chasers as if they could hear him from the air. James jumped up every few seconds, bouncing on his toes, eyes locked on the players with hungry intensity. Remus sat with them, quieter, but his gaze was sharp, tracking the movement with an intelligence that looked more like study than worship. Peter clapped whenever everyone else clapped, late by half a beat. On the pitch, the teams lined up on their brooms, red and gold against green and silver. The Slytherin captain, tall, angular, with a face like a sneer, raised his hand to shake Gryffindor's, and even from the stands Severus could sense the hostility, old and inherited. Madame Hoop's whistle shrilled. The balls were released. The players shot upward, splitting and diving. The crowd surged to its feet. A bludger screamed past like a cannonball, and students shrieked, half terrified, half delighted. Severus's eyes tracked the movement, trying to make sense of it. The quaffle flashed between hands. Chasers darted, dodged, feinted. A keeper blocked with desperate sweeps of their arms. The game moved too fast to grasp in details. It was more like watching a storm. Lily cheered when a Gryffindor chaser scored. She grabbed Severus' sleeve without thinking, shaking it. "Did you see?" she shouted. Severus nodded, though he wasn't sure what she meant. He had seen bodies flying, seen the red ball go through a hoop. That seemed to be the point. As the match intensified, the stands grew louder. Slytherins booed. Gryffindors shouted insults. A group of Ravenclaws sang a ridiculous song about Gryffindor's keeper having the reflexes of a sloth. Severus leaned back slightly, overwhelmed by the sound. It reminded him of his father shouting, different words, same volume. The same ugly thrill people seemed to take in being loud. A figure in green robes moved along the edge of the Slytherin section below, drawing his eyes. An older student, tall, pale blonde hair sleeked back, posture perfect. A prefect badge caught the light on his chest. Lucius Malfoy. Severus had heard the name spoken in whispers already, always with a mix of admiration and irritation. Malfoy walked like the stone itself should move aside. Students parted for him without realizing they were doing it. Lucius paused, gaze flicking upward. His pale eyes landed on Severus. For a heartbeat, Severus felt the same cold pressure he'd felt with the Bloody Baron. Being seen, not as a person, but as a piece on a board. Lucius's mouth curved slightly. Not quite a smile. He inclined his head, the tiniest nod, like an acknowledgement of an interesting error. Severus's stomach twisted. He looked away quickly, focusing on the pitch, but he could feel that gaze on the back of his neck like heat. The match swung violently. A bludger smashed into a Gryffindor beater's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The crowd groaned. Gryffindor's seeker, small and fast, nearly collided with a Slytherin player in a brutal mid-air tangle that sent them both wobbling. James howled, half in fury, half in delight. "That's it. Go on." Severus glanced at James, watching him glow with something close to rapture. It was frightening how much James wanted the game, how much he seemed to live in the moment of risk. Sirius shouted too, laughing when a bludger missed a Slytherin by inches. It was as if danger made them happier. Severus looked down at his own hands, tucked into his sleeves for warmth. He didn't understand that hunger for the edge. He understood hunger for control, for knowledge, for something you could hold and measure. The final moments of the match were chaos. Gryffindor scored again, pulling ahead. Then, in a blur, Gryffindor's seeker Dove, arm outstretched. A roar erupted so loud Severus felt it in his bones. "The snitch!" Lily screamed, standing on the bench. "We've won!" Students leapt onto each other, hugging, shouting. Someone grabbed Severus from behind, jostling him. The scarf in his hands was yanked away and thrown into the air like a banner. Severus sat very still as the world celebrated around him, as if the noise might sweep him off the bench. He watched Lily's joy, bright and unguarded, and felt something small in his chest soften. She belonged here. She belonged everywhere. James and Sirius were already vaulting down the stands, racing toward the pitch, sprinting as if they could share in victory by proximity. Remus followed more slowly, smiling faintly. Peter scurried after them like a shadow trying to keep up. Lily slid back down beside Severus, breathless and laughing. "Wasn't that incredible?" Severus hesitated, then said, "It was. Loud." Lily laughed harder. "Yes, it is. But it's ours. Ours." The word stuck in Severus's throat. He didn't know if he would ever be able to say it. They made their way back toward the castle with the crowd. The corridors rang with victory chants. Gryffindors paraded through, banging on walls, singing off-key. In the common room, the fire had been made huge, roaring. Someone had conjured streamers that floated in spirals. Older students passed around butterbeer, their cheeks flushed. The room smelled of smoke and spilled drink in triumph. Severus hovered near the edge, trying to disappear into a shadowed corner. He didn't know how to celebrate. He didn't know what part of him was supposed to rise up and join in. A groan near the hearth made him look up. The Gryffindor beater who'd been hit earlier sat on the rug, holding his shoulder, face pale. Someone had attempted a healing charm and failed. The bruise had spread in ugly purple waves. The boy's friend looked helpless, eyes darting around for an adult. Severus moved before he could think. He dropped to a crouch beside the injured boy, ignoring the startled looks. "Don't keep poking it," Severus snapped at the friend. "You'll make it worse." The friend bristled. "Who asked you?" Severus pulled his bag open and yanked out a small tin of ointment he brewed under Slughorn's supervision as extra practice. Something simple, a bruise salve made from arnica and dittany and a base of beeswax. He'd made it because he could, because making things that worked made him feel less powerless. He dabbed a finger into the salve and pressed it gently onto the bruise. The injured boy hissed, then blinked as the pain dulled. Color returned to his face. "What's that?" the friend asked, suspicion turning to interest. "Bruise paste," Severus said tersely. "Hold still." The bruise lightened visibly under his touch, purple fading toward yellow. The boy's shoulders dropped in relief. "Thanks," the injured boy muttered, grudging. He looked up at Severus properly, as if seeing him for the first time. "You're... right?" Severus nodded once. The boy's friend frowned. "Did you make that?" Severus didn't answer directly. "It works," he said. The friend's mouth opened, then closed. He looked away, awkward, as if complimenting Severus might cost him something. Severus stood and wiped his fingers on his robe. He felt eyes on him, not mocking this time, but uncertain. Appraising. Lily appeared at his side, smiling softly. "I saw," she whispered. "Ah, that was good." Severus shrugged, trying to hide the warmth in his chest. "It was nothing." Lily's gaze held his. "It wasn't." Across the room, James looked up from where he and Sirius were being cheered by a cluster of older students. James' eyes landed on Severus. For a moment, there was no grin, no easy mockery, only a sharp, unreadable look. Then Sirius elbowed him, laughing at something, and James' face slid back into brightness. Severus turned away, heart beating hard. He had helped a Gryffindor. He had been thanked, however grudgingly. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on a thin ledge, knowing the fall could still come. But for the first time, the Gryffindor common room warmth did not feel entirely like someone else's fire. For a moment, only a moment, it felt like it might, someday, be his too. At night, long after the common room noise had thinned into tired murmurs, Severus lay awake behind his curtain, listening. The dormitory smelled of smoke clinging to robes and the faint sourness of sweat. Outside the window, the wind rattled the glass. Somewhere in the tower, a portrait snored loudly. James and Sirius had fallen into bed in a sprawl of satisfied exhaustion. Their laughter had followed them up the stairs like a trail of crumbs. Peter had mumbled goodnight to no one in particular and crawled under his blankets like a frightened animal. Remus had stayed in the common room with a book until the last embers of the fire dulled, then slipped upstairs with quiet steps. Severus had tried to sleep. He couldn't. The day's noise still rang in his ears. Worse than that was the strange, unwelcome feeling of being seen. The injured beater's grudging thanks. Lily's soft pride. Jameson's unreadable stare. Severus stared at the underside of his canopy and willed his mind to empty. It refused. A faint creak made him go still. Curtains rustled. Severus held his breath, listening. Someone's feet touched the floor. Careful, quiet. A trunk lid opened with a soft click, then closed again. Another pause. Fabric whispered. Severus's fingers curled around his wand under the blanket. He didn't move, but every muscle tightened, ready. The dormitory door clicked open. Severus's eyes snapped toward the gap in his curtain. Through the thin opening, he saw Sirius' silhouette slipping out, robe pulled over his nightshirt. James followed a heartbeat later, moving with the careless confidence of someone who never expected consequences. They closed the door behind them with infuriating care. Severus lay very still, heart pounding. They were sneaking out. He knew the rules. No wandering the corridors at night. No leaving the tower. Detentions and points and Filch's delighted punishments. They were going anyway because they could. Because the rules were for other people. Severus waited, tense, listening for footsteps returning. For the door clicking again. Nothing. Minutes passed. The dormitory settled into deeper silence. Peter's snores began, thin and wheezy. The wind sighed against the windows. Severus's curtains stirred. He jerked, wand ready, before he realized it was Remus's hand gently parting the fabric. Remus's face appeared in the gap, pale in the dim light. "You're awake," he whispered. Severus didn't lower his wand. "What do you want?" Remus's gaze flicked to the wand, then to Severus' face. He didn't flinch. "I heard you moving," he said. "You've been awake for ages." "So?" Remus hesitated, then stepped closer to the curtain. "They've gone," he murmured, nodding toward the door. Severus's jaw tightened. "I noticed." Remus's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "They think they're clever. They're idiots." Remus exhaled softly, as if he agreed more than he wanted to admit. He leaned against the bedpost, careful not to enter Severus's space without permission. "You could tell," he said. Severus narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Remus's gaze drifted to the dark ceiling. "Because if Filch catches them, it won't just be their skin in trouble. McGonagall will take points from the whole house. People will blame whoever they can. You know that." Severus's throat tightened. He did know that. He also knew that if James and Sirius got caught, they'd shrug and laugh, and somehow the anger would slide off them and stick to someone else. Someone less loved, less loud. "What do you care?" Severus asked, and the question came out sharper than he intended. Remus's expression flickered. For an instant, something weary and old showed through, like a crack in a young face. "Because I'm in Gryffindor too," he said quietly. "And because I'm tired of fighting battles that aren't mine." Severus stared at him, startled. Remus didn't talk like the others. Remus didn't laugh loudly. Remus watched, absorbed, as if life was something to be read and understood rather than conquered. "I thought you liked them," Severus muttered. Remus's eyes softened. "I do," he admitted. "Sometimes they can be brilliant, and sometimes they're unbearable." Severus snorted. "Sometimes." Remus's mouth curved. "All right. Often." Silence stretched. Severus could hear the tick of the room's old clock, slow and steady. He could hear Peter's snoring. The absence of James and Sirius felt like a gap in a wall. Remus looked at Severus again. "You're good at potions," he said abruptly, as if changing subjects before the other could bite. "Slughorn talked about you at dinner once." Severus' shoulders went stiff. "Did he?" "He said," Remus went on, voice low, "that you remind him of someone who doesn't waste time. He likes that." Severus didn't know what to do with that. Praise from Slughorn had felt like a warm thing. Hearing it repeated by Remus made it feel like something suspicious. "What do you want?" Severus asked again. Remus's fingers toyed with the edge of Severus's curtain, not pulling it, just touching the fabric. "I want," he said slowly, "to not have to choose sides all the time. I want to be able to sit in this room without feeling like we're going to tear each other apart." Evening. Severus's throat tightened. "Then tell them to stop." Remus's gaze flicked toward the door, resigned. "I try." Severus could hear the unspoken. They don't always listen. Remus's eyes returned to Severus. "You don't make it easy," he added softly. Severus bristled. "I didn't start." "I know," Remus said, cutting him off gently. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying you don't have to react to everything they do." Severus's stomach twisted. "If I don't react," he said, voice low, "they win." Remus studied him for a long moment. In the dim light, his face looked more serious, his eyes too thoughtful. "Sometimes," Remus said, "they win either way. Sometimes the only thing you can choose is what they turn you into." The words landed in Severus's chest like a stone. He wanted to reject them, to hiss and snap, but something about Remus's calm made it hard to dismiss. Before Severus could respond, the dormitory door clicked. Remus's head snapped up. His posture changed instantly. Alert, ready. Footsteps, soft, careful, crossed the room. James' curtain rustled. Sirius' curtain followed. They whispered, low and quick, and then a muffled laugh. Remus stepped back from Severus's bed, expression smoothing into innocent calm. He lifted his book from his own bed as if he'd merely been reading. Sirius' voice drifted through the dark. "Did you see his face?" he whispered, laughter bubbling. James chuckled. He nearly jumped out of his skin. Severus lay rigid, fury rising. They had been somewhere doing something that made them laugh like that. Something stupid. Something dangerous. Something that would inevitably come back to bite someone. Remus glanced toward Severus one last time, and in his eyes Severus saw a message as clear as words. "Don't." Severus's jaw clenched. He stared at his canopy, breathing hard through his nose. He could go to McGonagall. He could report them. He could watch them fall. But he could already hear the common room, the voices, the accusations. Snape the sneak. Snape the traitor. Snape the boy who couldn't take a joke and had to run to a professor. He hated that the choice was even a choice. In the darkness, Remus's earlier words echoed in his head. "What they turn you into." Severus closed his eyes and tried to swallow his anger like a bitter potion. It burned all the way down. And in that burn, he felt something else too. Faint and unsettling. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. For the quiet boy across the room who had stepped to his curtain in the dark just to warn. Severus did not know if he wanted that understanding. Understanding made things complicated. But Gryffindor, he was learning, was built on complications. In Gryffindor, enemies slept 3 beds away, and allies sometimes arrived on whispering feet in the middle of the night. The Hogwarts Express carried Lily away under a sky the color of lead, and with her went the last warm thread Severus had been clinging to. The station platform emptied fast. Students vanished into clusters of parents and siblings, arms full of parcels, voices bright with holiday promises. Severus stood alone at the edge of the platform until the whistle shrieked and the train began to pull away. Lily leaned out of a window and waved hard enough that her sleeve flapped. Her smile was bright, determined, as if she could drag him with her by sheer will. "Write to me," she shouted. Severus lifted a hand stiffly, the motion awkward. He didn't shout back. His throat was too tight. When the train was gone, the wind returned, sharp and cold. The remaining students, only a scattering, were ushered back toward the castle by a cheerful prefect who spoke too loudly, as if volume could fill emptiness. The castle changed after most students left. Corridors grew quieter, footsteps louder. The air seemed colder, Not because of weather, but because there were fewer bodies to warm it. Portraits slept more openly. Even Peeves disappeared, sulking somewhere. Severus stayed because there was nowhere else to go that was safer. Home was a narrow place full of shouting and silence. Home smelled of stale beer and resentment. Hogwarts, for all its cruelty, at least had rules. In the dormitory, the beds of James, Sirius, Peter, and Remus were made up and empty. Trunks were gone. Severus's bed sat alone, curtains drawn like a small tent in an abandoned camp. He spent the first day of the holidays in the library until Madame Pince shooed him out with a suspicious glare. He wandered the empty corridors with his hands clasped behind his back, as if he were an old man. He watched snow begin to fall outside the tall windows, thick flakes swirling down over the black lake. On Christmas Eve, the Great Hall was transformed. Only one of the 4 long tables remained, set near the hearth. Evergreen garlands hung from the walls. A dozen enormous fir trees stood along the sides of the hall, their branches heavy with silver ornaments and tiny glowing lights that drifted like fireflies. Severus lingered by the doors, hesitant. The small group of remaining students, mostly older boys who had the uneasy look of people avoiding home, sat clustered together, laughing too loudly, pretending to be carefree. At the staff table, which had been lowered to join the single long table, Dumbledore sat pouring drinks into goblets with an amused expression. Professor McGonagall sat stiffly beside him, eyes sharp even in holiday finery. Professor Slughorn beamed at everyone, cheeks rosy, waving a fork as he talked. Hagrid, enormous and awkward, sat near the end, fiddling with a cracker. Dumbledore looked up and saw Severus hovering. His eyes brightened. "Mr. Snape," he said warmly. Come in, come in. There is plenty of food, and it is all far too good to be eaten only by those who cannot appreciate it properly." Severus's stomach tightened. Being singled out by the headmaster felt dangerous, like being spotlighted. But refusing would be ruder than he could risk. He crossed the hall and sat at the far end of the table, as far from the other students as possible without looking like he was fleeing, his hands folded in his lap. He watched the plates fill themselves, the puddings appear, the cranberry sauce glisten. Hagrid leaned toward him, beard bobbing. "All right, Severus," he rumbled, voice gentle. "You all on your own then?" Severus nodded once. Hagrid's eyes softened. "Nothing wrong with staying at Hogwarts," he said quickly, as if Severus might feel ashamed. Well, it's a good place, Hogwarts is. Best place I ever knew." Severus didn't know how to answer kindness from someone that big. He muttered, "Yes," and kept his gaze on his plate. Conversation swelled around the table. Slughorn told a story about a former student who'd tried to brew a love potion and ended up making his own hair fall out. The older boys laughed. McGonagall's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Dumbledore's laughter rolled like warm thunder. Severus ate in careful bites, the food rich and strange. He watched the professors more than the students. He watched McGonagall's sharp gaze, the way she seemed to notice everything even when she was pretending to relax. He watched Slughorn's eyes as they flicked from face to face, always measuring. He watched Dumbledore's hands, long, deft, breaking a cracker with Hagrid as if it was the most important task in the world. At some point, a small pile of gifts appeared beside each student's plate, wrapped in paper that shimmered faintly. Severus stared at his pile, throat tightening. He hadn't expected gifts. He had not told anyone he was staying. Hagrid pushed a lumpy parcel towards Severus with a shy grin. "Made it myself," he said. "For ya." Severus's fingers hovered over the parcel as if it might bite. He opened it carefully. Inside was a thick pair of woolen gloves, roughly knitted in a deep maroon. They were uneven, one thumb slightly larger than the other, but they were warm just to look at. Severus swallowed hard. "Thank you," he managed. Hagrid's smile brightened. "Keep your hands warm, eh?" Severus opened the other gifts with hands that felt clumsy. A tin of sweets from Slughorn, accompanied by a booming, "For the promising young man?" A small book from McGonagall, A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. its cover neat and severe as she was. "You are in my house," she said briskly. "You will represent it well." And then, at the bottom of the pile, a plain parcel wrapped in brown paper with no ribbon at all. Severus's heart thudded. He unwrapped it slowly. A book lay inside, old but well cared for, the title stamped in gold, The Practical Potioneer, Advanced Preparations and Protective Drafts. Severus's breath caught. The book was far beyond first year. It was the kind of text that would be kept behind a teacher's desk, offered only to those who had proven themselves. He looked up, startled. Dumbledore watched him over the rim of his spectacles, eyes bright. "A small thing," Dumbledore said, voice gentle. "But I thought you might enjoy it." Severus's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't know what to say. "Thank you" felt too small. "I don't deserve it" felt too honest. Dumbledore's gaze remained steady. "It is easy," Dumbledore went on softly, "to believe we are defined by where we come from, by the rooms we grew up in, by the voices we heard when we were small." Severus's fingers tightened on the book's cover. His pulse hammered. He had not told Dumbledore anything about home. He hadn't needed to. Perhaps Dumbledore could see it anyway, in the set of his shoulders, in the hunger behind his eyes. "But," Dumbledore said, smiling slightly, "we are also defined by the choices we make when no one is watching." Severus's throat tightened. He glanced down at the book, at the gold title gleaming. "Why are you giving this to me?" he whispered. Because the question burned. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, but the twinkle did not erase the seriousness beneath. "Because," he said, "I have seen you make choices. Some good, some less so. And I suspect you will make many more." Severus bristled. "I'm not a villain." Dumbledore's smile was warm, but his gaze was sharp. "No, Mr. Snape, you are a boy, and boys grow into men. And men do not always like what they become if they have never been offered another possibility." Severus's fingers dug into the book's spine. The hall seemed suddenly too large, too bright. He wanted to run. He wanted to stay and absorb every word. Dumbledore leaned back, letting the conversation drift away as if it had never happened. He turned to Hagrid and began discussing whether Christmas crackers were a Muggle invention worth copying. Severus sat very still, book heavy in his hands. He had received a gift from the headmaster. He had been offered a possibility. Outside, snow fell thicker, covering the grounds in white silence. Inside, the fire crackled, and for a moment Severus felt something he hadn't expected to feel in a hall full of strangers. Warmth. Not the warmth of belonging, not yet, but the warmth of being seen without being mocked. It frightened him almost as much as the cold. The book Dumbledore had given him did not leave Severus' hands for days. He read it in the dormitory by the light of his wand, wrapped in Hagrid's lumpy gloves. He read it in the common room when it was empty, curled in an armchair too big for him, listening to the fire pop. He read it in the library, until Madame Pince glared, and Severus learned to hide the more advanced chapters beneath a safer cover. The book was not just recipes. It was logic. It was protection. It was power that came from understanding how ingredients behaved, how heat and time and intention could turn weakness into strength. And in the margins of one chapter, written in a hand not unlike Severus's own, tight, slanted, impatient, there was a note about antidotes that referenced another text. A text in the restricted section. The restricted section had been a shadow at the edge of Severus's awareness since the first week. He had seen the black iron gate, the heavy chains, the warning signs. He had seen older students slip through with teacher-signed notes, like they were entering a private club. He had watched them carry out books that looked like they hated being touched. He had told himself he didn't care. Now the reference in the margin burned. On the third day after Christmas, when the castle was so quiet Severus could hear his own footsteps echo like a stranger's, he made up his mind. He walked to the library with his heart beating too hard for such a simple act. Madame Pince sat at her desk, knitting with brisk, angry motions, as if every stitch was punishment for students who dared exist. Severus approached her desk and put on his most polite expression, which felt like wearing someone else's face. "Madam Pince," he said softly. "May I have a book from the restricted section?" Her knitting needles paused. Her eyes, sharp as pins, looked him up and down. "No." The answer was so immediate, Severus almost laughed. "Almost. I need it for potions," he tried, voice careful. Madam Pince's lips thinned. "Potions," she repeated, as if the word was suspicious. "You are a first year." Severus swallowed. "It's referenced in another text," he insisted, and he hated that he sounded like he was begging. Madam Pince's gaze flicked to the book under his arm. She recognized it. Severus saw it in the slight tightening of her mouth. Recognition did not soften her. "If a professor believes you require a restricted book," she said coldly, "a professor will provide you with a note. Until then, you will stay on this side of the gate." Severus's fingers curled around the book's spine. "Yes, madam," he said, and backed away before his anger could break through. He sat at a table and pretended to read for almost an hour, waiting for his heartbeat to settle. He watched Madam Pince count returned books, her motions exact. He watched the small group of holiday students drift in and out. He listened for footsteps. When Madam Pince finally rose to fetch something from the back room, Severus' body moved before his mind could argue. He slid from his seat and walked toward the iron gate, steps measured, face calm. His wand lay warm in his pocket. His palms were damp. The gate was locked with a thick chain. A padlock glinted. Severus stared at it, teeth clenched. He had known it would not be easy. He had still hoped, stupidly, that it would be. He glanced over his shoulder. Madam Pince's backroom door was closed. The library was empty except for 2 Ravenclaw sixth years at the far end, heads bent over a map. Severus drew his wand. He didn't know many unlocking charms. The proper one, Alohomora, was not, he was fairly sure, meant for padlocks like this. But he had read. He had always read. There were other ways, crude and clever. He flicked his wand and whispered, "Alohomora." The padlock clicked. Severus froze, stunned. The chain loosened, clinking softly. For a heartbeat he stared at it, disbelieving. Then, before he could think better, he slipped through the gate and pulled it shut behind him, letting the chain fall back into place to hide his trespass. The restricted section smelled different, older, darker. The air was colder, as if the books drank warmth. Shelves loomed higher, packed with volumes bound in cracked skin and metal clasps. Some books whispered faintly, the sound like insects in a jar. Severus's pulse pounded with exhilaration and fear. He moved along the shelves, scanning titles, feeling as if the books were watching him. He found the reference text after several minutes. A compendium of counter-curses and antidotal drafts, its spine stained with something that looked uncomfortably like old blood. He pulled it free carefully. The book resisted, as if reluctant to leave the shelf. Severus carried it to a nearby table, sat, and opened it. The pages were thick and yellowed. The ink was dense. The first paragraph alone was more complex than anything he'd seen in first-year work. Severus's mind snapped into focus, hungry. He began to read, taking notes in tiny script on a scrap of parchment. He did not hear the library door open. He did not hear footsteps until they were too close. A shadow fell over the page. Severus looked up. Argus Filch stood above him, face lit with ugly delight. His eyes gleamed like a rat's. Mrs. Norris, the bony cat, perched on the table beside him, tail twitching smugly. "Well," Filch breathed, savoring each word. "Well, well, well, well. Look what we've got." "Oh." Severus's stomach dropped through the floor. Filch's grin widened. "Little rule breaker," he crooned. "Little sneak, in the restricted section, without a note." Severus's mind raced. Run, die. Lay, died. Hex, did plead. None of it would work. Filch reached for the book with claw-like fingers. "I'll just take that," he said sweetly, "and then we'll go have a nice chat with Professor." Severus slammed the book shut and yanked it toward his chest. Filch's fingers missed by inches. "No," Severus snapped, and the word burst out like a spell. Filch's face twisted. "No?" His voice rose. "Oh, I'll give you no. I'll give you chains. I'll give you the damp cellars. I'll—" Severus shoved his chair back. It scraped loudly. The Ravenclaws looked up, startled. Filch lunged, hand grabbing for Severus's sleeve. Severus reacted on instinct. His wand flashed. Lumos. A burst of blinding light exploded from Severus's wand tip, so bright it filled the restricted section like lightning. Filch shouted and threw an arm over his eyes. Mrs. Norris hissed, claws digging into wood. Severus bolted. He ran through the iron gate, the chain clinking as he shoved past, and sprinted between shelves as Madame Pince's furious voice rose in the main library. "What is going on?" Filch bellowed. "Stop him!" Severus's heart hammered. His legs burned. He burst out of the library and into the corridor, skidding on stone, bag thudding against his side. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to get away. Footsteps thundered behind him. Filch was slower, but he was relentless, and Mrs. Norris' claws clicked like tapping nails. Severus turned sharply into a side corridor, then another, then another. The castle a maze he knew only in parts. Portraits woke and yelped as he passed. A suit of armor clanked in protest when he nearly collided with it. He ducked through a door into an empty classroom and slammed it shut. He pressed his back against it, breathing hard, wand raised. Silence, thick, waiting. Then a soft knock sounded on the door. Severus's breath caught. His wand trembled. The doorknob turned. Severus's mouth went dry. He lifted his wand higher, ready to hex Filch if he had to. The door opened. Albus Dumbledore stood in the doorway, alone, his expression calm. Severus froze. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, taking in the wild breathing, the raised wand, the ink stains on his fingers. He did not look angry. That, somehow, was worse. "Good afternoon, Mr. Snape," Dumbledore said mildly. "I believe you have been running." Severus's hand lowered by inches, not from obedience, but from sudden exhaustion. I.e., footsteps pounded in the corridor outside. Filch's voice rose, breathless and triumphant. "Headmaster! Headmaster! I've got him cornered." Dumbledore turned his head slightly, gaze moving to the corridor without hurry. "Ah," he said. "Mr. Filch, how industrious." Filch burst into view, face red, eyes bulging. Mrs. Norris slunk at his heels. Filch pointed at Severus like he'd caught a thief stealing silver. "He was in the restricted section." Filch spat. "Without a note! I saw him! He ran!" Dumbledore held up one hand. Filch's tirade faltered as if the gesture had physically stopped him. "I see," Dumbledore said, eyes still gentle. "Thank you, Mr. Filch. I will handle this." "Nay, nah." Filch's face contorted, disappointment fighting with glee. "But, Headmaster, he should be punished. Properly. I've got chains." Dumbledore's smile sharpened by a fraction. "No chains today, Mr. Filch." Filch's shoulders sagged. Mrs. Norris glared at Severus as if promising future revenge. Dumbledore inclined his head. "Thank you. You may go." Filch hesitated, then shuffled away, muttering under his breath. His footsteps faded. Silence settled again. Dumbledore stepped into the classroom and closed the door behind him. He looked at Severus, and in his gaze, Severus felt that same sensation as the night in the Great Hall, being seen too clearly. "Tell me," Dumbledore said softly. "What were you looking for?" Severus's throat tightened. His pride flared. "Knowledge," he snapped. Dumbledore nodded as if Severus had answered politely. "Knowledge," he repeated. And why did you believe you could not ask for it? Severus's fingers clenched around his wand. Madame Pince wouldn't. Madame Pince, Dumbledore said gently, is protective of her books. Sometimes overly so. But Hogwarts has many ways to gain knowledge without stealing it. Nah. Stealing. The word stung. Severus's cheeks burned. I didn't steal it, he muttered. I was going to put it back. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled faintly, but there was no humor in it. Of course you were, he said. And perhaps you would have. But consider, if you are willing to break rules for knowledge now, what rules will you be willing to break when the knowledge becomes more dangerous? Severus swallowed hard. I can handle it. Dumbledore's gaze remained steady. Can you? He asked softly. Or do you simply believe you must be able to handle everything alone? The question hit too close. Severus's jaw tightened. Dumbledore sighed, the sound almost like regret. I am not here to frighten you away from books, he said. I am here to frighten you away from the idea that power is the only thing that can keep you safe. Severus's breath caught. Dumbledore held out his hand. May I have the book? Severus hesitated, then reluctantly pulled the compendium from his bag and placed it into Dumbledore's palm. Dumbledore's fingers rested on the cover with an affection that made the book look, briefly, less sinister. I will return this, Dumbledore said, and I will speak to Professor Slughorn about giving you supervised access to certain texts if he believes you are ready. Severus stared. He hadn't expected mercy. He hadn't expected help. Dumbledore reached into his robe and drew out a small, thin volume bound in blue. He offered it to Severus. Take this, he said. It is not restricted, but it is useful. Defensive spells, protective charms, practical things. The sort of knowledge that keeps a person alive without costing them their soul. Nah. Severus's fingers hovered over the book, reluctant. The words soul and cost made his skin crawl, as if Dumbledore had put a hand on something raw inside him. He took the book anyway. Dumbledore's smile returned, gentle. You will have a detention, he added, as if remembering a necessary detail. Not with chains. With me. Severus's stomach twisted. With you? Dumbledore nodded. You will help me reorganize the potion stores in the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey is very particular. You will learn a great deal. Me. Pun. Severus didn't know whether to feel relieved or trapped. Dumbledore reached for the door. Come, he said, as if Severus were simply late for tea. Severus followed, book clutched in his hands, heart pounding with confusion. He had broken the rules. He had been caught. And instead of punishment that would make him smaller, he had been given another path, harder, brighter, as the hat had said. As he walked beside Dumbledore down the quiet corridor, Severus realized something with a cold clarity. Hogwarts was not just a place of magic. It was a place of choices. And someone, somehow, was watching to see which ones he would make. January arrived with ice. The lake edged with white. The stone steps outside the castle went slick and treacherous. The grounds looked as if someone had draped them in clean linen, hiding mud and secrets beneath. The first morning Lily returned. She burst into the common room with snow in her hair and color in her cheeks, dragging her trunk behind her like a trophy. Sev, she called the moment she saw him in his corner chair. Sev, you should have seen it. My dad tried to ask me if I'd learned to turn him into a frog. Severus stood too quickly, knocking his book slightly askew. You're back, he said, and hated how flat it sounded, as if her absence hadn't left a hollow in him. Lily grinned. Of course I'm back. I missed it. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Did you have a horrible time? Were they awful? Did they throw things at you while I was gone? Severus's mouth tightened. He could still feel the weight of the restricted section book, the cold thrill of trespass, the strange gentleness of Dumbledore's punishment. He could still feel the quiet of the castle without Lily's laughter. It was fine, he lied. Lily's gaze sharpened. Seth. He looked away. Nothing happened. Lily studied him for a moment, then sighed, exasperated. "You're the worst liar," she muttered, but she didn't press. Not yet. Lily always pressed eventually. Classes began again. The castle filled with noise and motion. James and Sirius returned too, louder than ever, bringing the winter air with them like a challenge. Sirius' face had a hard edge when he first came in, like he'd scraped himself on something sharp at home, but he covered it with laughter so quickly, Severus almost doubted he'd seen it. James' confidence was intact, if anything louder. He had a new broom brush from home and boasted about it in the dormitory, twirling it like a wand. Severus said nothing. Silence was sometimes the only way to avoid being dragged into someone else's performance. But performances followed Severus regardless. By the second week back, Severus had learned to expect pranks like weather. Sudden, irritating, inevitable. A toad in his bag. Ink that spilled itself. His bed curtains charmed to whisper insults when he drew them closed. Most of it was serious work. Sirius loved small cruelties that made people laugh. James followed, half because he enjoyed it, half because he enjoyed Sirius enjoying it. Remus, at least, sometimes looked uncomfortable. Sometimes. Then he would smooth his expression and pretend he hadn't noticed, the way people pretended not to hear a dog yelping behind a closed door. Severus endured, until the day he didn't. It was late afternoon, the sky already darkening with winter, when Severus crossed the courtyard carrying a stack of books. The air smelled of snow and cold stone. Students moved around him in clumps, laughter puffing white. He was almost at the archway when his foot slid. The stone beneath him had been coated in a thin sheen of ice that was too smooth, too deliberate. Severus's stomach lurched. He tried to catch himself, but the books in his arms shifted, unbalancing him. He went down hard, knee striking stone, books flying. Laughter exploded around him. Severus lay stunned for a heartbeat, pain blooming in his knee. His palms stung where they'd scraped. Above him, James and Sirius stood in the archway, grinning. Sirius' wand was tucked casually into his sleeve like a secret. James' eyes glittered. "Oh, careful," Sirius said, voice dripping with mock concern. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. Might damage your precious books." Severus's vision swam with rage. He pushed himself up, hands shaking, and began gathering his books with jerky movements. Someone snickered. Someone murmured, "Classic." Lily's voice cut through the noise. "What did you do?" Severus looked up. Lily stood a few feet away, cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes blazing. Her gaze pinned James and Sirius like a spell. James' grin shifted, becoming charming. "Nothing," he said lightly. "He slipped. Not our fault he can't walk." Daddy. Sirius shrugged, as if ice simply happened beneath Severus' feet by coincidence. Lily's eyes narrowed. "I saw your wand, Sirius." Sirius' smile didn't falter. "And maybe I was warming the air." Lily took a step forward. "Don't lie." James' gaze flicked between Lily and Severus. Something like irritation crossed his face, quick and sharp, before he replaced it with careless amusement. "Evans," he said, voice warm. "You're getting worked up over nothing." "It's not nothing," Lily snapped. Severus's hands clenched around a book's spine. The laughter around them made his skin crawl. The pain in his knee pulsed. The humiliation was a familiar poison, and it rose in him like bile. "Stop defending him," Sirius said to Lily, eyes bright with cruel amusement. "He doesn't need you." Severus's head snapped up. "Shut up," he hissed. Sirius leaned in, delighted. "Or what, Snape? You'll cry." Something inside Severus broke. His wand was in his hand before he knew he'd reached for it. "Expelliarmus," Severus spat. The spell hit Sirius' wand hand with a crack. Sirius' wand flew into the air and skidded across the courtyard, spinning. Sirius' grin vanished, replaced by shock. For a heartbeat, the courtyard held its breath. Then James Mwan was up, his expression hard. "Oh, so that's how it is," he said, voice low. "Don't," Lily warned, but James didn't look at her. Severus's pulse pounded. His wand felt hot, alive. He didn't back away. James' spell came fast. Severus dodged on instinct, but the courtyard was slick, his knee already hurt. A jinx clipped his shoulder, sending a sharp numbness down his arm. Severus snarled and fired back without thinking, a wordless curse that made the air snap. James jerked aside, but the spell caught his robe hem, singing it. A faint smell of smoke rose. Students shouted. Someone screamed, delighted rather than afraid. Lily's face was white. "Stop it!" she shouted, stepping between them. Severus's wand jerked upward, half uncontrolled, fury blinding him. James' wand raised too, ready to fire past Lily if he had to. "Enough!" The voice cracked across the courtyard like thunder. Professor McGonagall strode out of the archway, eyes flashing. Her gaze took in the ice, the scattered books, Sirius reaching for his wand, James' singed hem, Severus' numb arm, Lily standing between them like a shield. McGonagall's lips pressed into a thin line. "Inside," she snapped. "No." No one argued. Even Sirius' arrogance shrank under her stare. McGonagall marched them through corridors that seemed colder than the snow outside, straight to her office. She made them stand in a line. "I am," she said slowly, astonished. James opened his mouth. "Professor, he..." McGonagall's gaze silenced him. "I did not ask for your excuses, Mr. Potter." She turned to Sirius. "Mr. Black, did you charm ice onto the courtyard stones?" Sirius lifted his chin. "No, Professor." McGonagall's eyes narrowed. "Do not insult my intelligence. 20 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Black." Sirius' face went white. 20. 20. McGonagall repeated, voice sharp. "For endangering other students and for lying to a professor." She turned to James. 10 points from Gryffindor, Mr. Potter, for dueling in the courtyard and for encouraging reckless behavior." James's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. McGonagall's gaze moved to Severus. Severus's stomach tightened. He braced himself. "Mr. Snape," McGonagall said. 10 points from Gryffindor, for casting a disarming charm in anger and for returning a jinx with a curse you have no business using." Severus's fists clenched. McGonagall's eyes flashed. "You do not get to justify your choices by pointing to someone else. You are not 5 years old." Severus's cheeks burned. McGonagall turned to Lily, her expression softening by a fraction. "Miss Evans," she said, "you will not lose points. But you will remember that stepping between dueling students is not bravery. It is foolishness." "No." Lily's jaw tightened. "Yes, Professor." McGonagall drew a breath. "Detentions," she said coldly. "Mr. Potter and Mr. Black, Saturday. Mr. Snape, Saturday. You will all assist Mr. Filch in scrubbing the trophy room with your hands. No magic." Filch... ... The word made Severus's stomach twist. He remembered Filch's glee in the restricted section. McGonagall's gaze swept them one last time. "If I hear of another incident like this," she said, "I will personally see to it that you regret it." They were dismissed. Outside the office, Lily grabbed Severus's sleeve, pulling him into an empty alcove before James and Sirius could follow. Her eyes were bright with anger that didn't know where to go. "Why did you do that?" she demanded, voice shaking. Severus's jaw clenched. "Because I'm tired of falling." Lily's hands tightened on his sleeve. "And you think fighting them makes it better? You think losing points makes it better? Sev, you're letting them..." "Letting them what?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "Letting them make me angry? They already have." Lily flinched. The flinch made guilt stab Severus, sharp and unwelcome. Lily's voice dropped. "I came back," she said, quiet and fierce. "And I thought, maybe you'd been all right. Maybe you'd had a good holiday. Maybe Hogwarts had been kind to you for once. And the first thing I see is you throwing curses in a courtyard like I'm what?" Severus hissed. Lily's eyes flashed. "Like you don't care what you become." The words landed like a slap. Severus stared at her, throat tight. He wanted to say he did care. He wanted to say he cared too much, that every insult and laugh and point deduction pressed on him until he couldn't breathe. But the words tangled. Pride rose like a wall. He yanked his sleeve free. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered. Lily's face went still. "I'm trying," she whispered. Severus turned away before he could see the hurt deepen. He walked down the corridor alone, knee throbbing, arm still numb, the weight of points lost pressing like stone on his chest. "In Gryffindor," they said, "you fought for what was right." Severus wasn't sure anymore if he was fighting for rightness. He was fighting because he was tired of being weak. And he was beginning to fear that tiredness could turn into something darker if he didn't learn how to stop. The invitation came on cream-colored parchment with green ink, delivered at breakfast by an owl that looked faintly offended to be carrying anything for a first year. "Professor Slughorn requests the pleasure of your company for tea in his office this Saturday at 4 o'clock. Do try the crystallized pineapple." Severus stared at the note, as if it might be a trap. His fingers smudged the green ink slightly. He could feel eyes on him from along the Gryffindor bench, curious glances, murmurs. Invitations carried weight in Hogwarts, even when you didn't understand the game. Lily leaned over his shoulder reading. Her eyebrows lifted. "Seth," she whispered, excitement rising. He's inviting you." Severus's jaw tightened. "It doesn't say only me." Lily blinked and held up her own note. Identical. Her grin widened. "It's us." Severus felt a strange, tight relief. If Lily was there, it would be safer. Lily had a way of making rooms less sharp. Saturday came with gray sky and a damp chill that seeped into bones. Severus spent the day tense, unable to focus on lessons. James and Sirius made jokes about Snape the social climber, but their laughter was edged, uncertain. They didn't like that someone else was being noticed. At 4 o'clock, Severus and Lily climbed the stairs toward Slughorn's office. The corridor smelled of polished wood and faint perfume. Lily kept bouncing on her toes, unable to hide her excitement. "You think he's going to make us brew something?" she whispered. Severus shook his head. "It's tea." Lily's smile turned sly. "Tea with Slughorn isn't just tea." Severus didn't answer. He had read enough to know Slughorn collected people like treasures. He didn't know whether being collected was flattering or frightening. Slughorn's office was warm, almost stifling, filled with the smell of sweets and pipe tobacco. The curtains were drawn, lamps glowing. Shelves held glass jars and curious objects, and an enormous armchair near the fireplace looked as though it might swallow a person whole. Slughorn himself bustled forward, face beaming. "Ah, my two little lions," he boomed, clapping his hands. Come in. Severus, my boy." "Lily." Delighted. He ushered them in with the enthusiasm of someone welcoming guests to a feast. Sit. Tea? Pumpkin juice? I've got some lovely little biscuits that are enchanted to refill themselves. You'll adore them." Severus sat stiffly on the edge of a velvet chair, hands in his lap. Lily sat more comfortably, eyes wide as she took in everything. Other students were already there. Older, mostly. A Ravenclaw girl with dark curls and a bored expression. 2 Hufflepuff boys who looked nervous in Slughorn's cluttered office. A tall Gryffindor 5th year with a prefect badge and a confident smile. And near the fireplace, seated as if he belonged there by right, Lucius Malfoy. His pale hair was immaculate. He wore his Slytherin robes with effortless elegance, green silk lining visible when he moved. A silver badge gleamed at his chest, Head boy, perhaps. Or simply a more impressive prefect badge than anyone else. Beside Lucius sat a girl Severus recognized from glimpses in corridors. Narcissa Black. Her blonde hair fell in smooth waves, her posture perfect. Her expression was polite in the way a painting was polite. Beautiful, untouchable. Severus's stomach tightened. Sirius' cousin. He wondered fleetingly what it was like to sit beside a Black without having to live in the shadow of their name. Lucius's gaze lifted as Severus and Lily entered. His eyes flicked to Lily first, cool assessment, then to Severus. Something like interest warmed his pale gaze, faint but real. Slughorn bustled around pouring tea. Now, he said. Introductions. I refuse to have awkward silence in my office. It gives me indigestion. Severus, Lily, you know Mr. Malfoy, I'm sure. Lucius is one of my finest. No, Lucius inclined his head. Evans, he said to Lily, voice smooth. Snape. Lily nodded politely, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Severus felt a strange surge of resentment on her behalf. Lucius said names like he was deciding their value. Narcissa's pale eyes rested on Lily for a moment too long, then slid to Severus, dismissive and curious at once. She offered the faintest smile, thin, controlled. Slughorn clapped his hands again. Now then, he said, settling into his enormous armchair. I've brought you all here because I enjoy talent, and I enjoy connections. And, he added with a wink, I enjoy good conversation. He launched into a story about a former student who'd brewed a potion so fine it had been sold at St. Mungo's for years. The older students laughed in the right places. The Hufflepuff boys looked relieved to have something to do besides sit stiffly. Severus listened, sipping tea that tasted of bergamot and honey. He watched Lucius. Lucius listened with an air of relaxed attention, chiming in with polite remarks, making Slughorn beam. Lucius knew how to be admired. At one point, Slughorn turned to Lily. Now, Lily, he boomed. Tell us, are you enjoying Hogwarts? Lily smiled brightly. I love it, sir. As you should. Slughorn crowed. And your potions work has been excellent. I haven't seen such instinct in a long time. Lily flushed, pleased. Slughorn's gaze moved to Severus. And you, Severus? How are you finding things? Severus's jaw tightened. He knew what he was being asked, really. Not about Hogwarts. About people. About fit. I'm learning, he said cautiously. Slughorn's smile softened. Yes, you are. I can see it. There's a sharpness in you, my boy. A focus. Reminds me of, never mind. You keep working and you'll go far. Lucius's eyes narrowed slightly, as if taking note of the way Slughorn spoke to Severus. When Slughorn turned away, Lucius leaned forward, voice low, so only Severus could hear. You've impressed him, Lucius murmured. Severus's spine stiffened. So... Lucius's mouth curved faintly. So he doesn't impress easily. He remembers those who do. His gaze flicked to Severus's hands, to the ink stains that never quite left. You're clever. Too clever to be wasted. Pity. Cow. Severus's pulse quickened. He hated how much he wanted to be called clever by someone like Lucius, someone who walked through Hogwarts as if it were built for him. I'm not wasted, Severus said tightly. Lucius's eyes glinted, amused. No, he agreed. Not yet. Narcissa leaned toward Lucius, murmuring something Severus couldn't hear. Lucius's expression didn't change, but his fingers tapped once against his teacup. Lily caught Severus's eye from across the low table. Her gaze was sharp, questioning. She had noticed Lucius leaning in. She had noticed the subtle shift of attention. Severus looked away. Slughorn served crystallized pineapple with theatrical pride. Severus took a piece and chewed slowly, sweetness sticking to his teeth. Conversation drifted to Quidditch, then to ministry gossip, then to family names. The older students spoke of uncles and cousins with positions, of parents who knew important people, of summer holidays spent in places Severus couldn't even picture. The words slid under Severus's skin like splinters. He had nothing to offer in that language. His father had no title. His mother had no connections. His home was a damp house in a muggle town that didn't even know magic existed. And yet he sat here, in Slughorn's office, being looked at by Lucius Malfoy. That had to mean something. As the tea drew to an end, Lucius rose smoothly. "Professor," he said. "Thank you, as always." Slughorn beamed. "Ah, Lucius, my boy. You'll do great things. Great things." Lucius's gaze flicked to Severus as he passed. He paused just long enough to murmur, "If you ever want to talk about books you won't find in Gryffindor Tower, come to the dungeons. There are people who appreciate ambition." "No. Come." Severus's throat tightened. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The invitation hung in the air like perfume. Lucius and Narcissa glided out. The room felt colder after they left, as if their presence had sucked warmth and left behind polished emptiness. Lily waited until Slughorn was distracted with a Hufflepuff boy's question before leaning in close to Severus. "What did Malfoy say to you?" she whispered. Severus's fingers tightened on his teacup. "Nothing important." Lily's eyes narrowed. "Seth." Severus's jaw clenched. He said, "I'm clever." Lily's expression softened, but there was worry beneath. "You are clever," she said quietly. "You don't need Malfoy to tell you that." Severus looked at her, something sharp and defensive rising. "You don't know what it's like," he muttered. Lily's eyes flashed. "To be noticed. To be..." Severus stopped himself. "To be poor. To be looked down on. To be laughed at." The words lodged in his throat like stones. Lily's voice softened again. "Sev," she said, gentle now. "Malfoy isn't being kind. He's recruiting." Severus's stomach twisted. Recruiting for what? Lily's gaze held his, steady and brave. "For the kind of people who think they're better than everyone else." Severus's fingers clenched until his knuckles whitened. He thought of Lucius's smooth voice, his effortless power. He thought of Slytherin staring at him like he'd been misplaced. He thought of James and Sirius laughing, of Gryffindors whispering 10 points as he passed. "Better than everyone else," Lily said. Severus swallowed. "I'm not stupid," he muttered. "I know," Lily whispered. "That's why I'm scared." The fear in her voice was worse than anger. Severus looked away, throat tight. He had wanted to be seen. He had wanted to matter. Now he realized that being seen by the wrong people could be a kind of trap. And traps, Severus knew, were easy to step into when you were hungry. After the tea in Slughorn's office, the castle felt different. Nothing had changed in the corridors. The same stone, the same torches, the same portraits muttering. But Severus carried Lucius Malfoy's words like a weight beneath his ribs. There are people who appreciate ambition. He told himself he didn't care. He told himself he wouldn't be drawn in by polished smiles and whispered invitations. He told himself Lily was right, that Malfoy's kindness was a hook. But hunger didn't disappear just because you named it. Severus began spending more time in the dungeons, lingering after potions to clean his cauldron a second time, to ask Slughorn questions that didn't need asking. The air down there was familiar, cool, damp, shadowed. It felt safer than the bright noise of Gryffindor Tower. One evening, as he left the potions classroom with his bag heavy with notes, he found Lucius leaning against the corridor wall as if he'd been waiting for him. 2 other Slytherin boys stood nearby, Mulciber and Avery, both wearing smug expressions like masks. Lucius's eyes flicked over Severus. "Snape," he said smoothly. A moment. Severus's stomach tightened. He should have walked past. He should have pretended he hadn't heard. Instead, he stopped, because some stubborn part of him refused to run. Mulciber's mouth curved. "Look," he drawled to Avery. "The Gryffindors come to play." Severus's jaw clenched. "I didn't come." Lucius lifted a hand slightly, silencing Mulciber without looking at him. Mulciber's smile tightened, irritated. Lucius's gaze remained on Severus. "I asked Slughorn about you," he said, voice low. "He says you're making an ointment that could outdo some of the hospital wings stock. For a first year." "None. That's her now." Severus's fingers tightened on his bag strap. "So, Lucius smiled faintly. "So that kind of skill deserves proper resources." He reached into his robe and drew out a book, thin, bound in dark green leather. He held it out. Severus stared at it, suspicion prickling. "What is it?" "Something you'll find useful," Lucius said. "Nothing illegal. Not exactly. Just neglected by most. Practical hexes. Defensive tricks. The sort of thing you'll want when you're not protected by professors." Severus's throat tightened. He thought of Filch's grin. He thought of Jameson's wand pointed at him in the courtyard. He thought of Lily stepping between them, foolish and brave. Mulciber leaned in, eyes glittering. "Take it," he murmured. "Unless you're scared." Severus's cheeks burned. He hated being called scared. He hated that the word hit somewhere true. He reached out and took the book. The leather felt cool, smooth, too expensive for his hands. He slid it quickly into his bag, as if hiding it from the corridor itself. Lucius's smile deepened by a fraction, satisfied. "Good," he murmured. "Read. Learn. And if you have questions, you know where the dungeons are." He turned away without waiting for thanks, gliding down the corridor with Narcissa's polished detachment. Mulciber and Avery lingered, smirking. Avery's gaze slid over Severus's robes. "Shame," he said lazily. "You'd have looked better in green." Mulciber's eyes gleamed. "At least he's got the brains for it," he said, as if praising a pet. Severus forced his face blank. He walked away without answering, heart pounding. In Gryffindor Tower, the warmth felt suffocating. The common room was crowded, loud with chatter. People talked about homework, about Quidditch, about summer plans. James and Sirius lounged near the fire, laughing at something that made a group of younger boys howl with them. Lily spotted Severus as he came in, her smile quick. "Sev, I was looking for you. Severus's hand tightened on his bag strap, feeling the hidden book inside like a secret heartbeat. He cut her off. "Later," he muttered. Lily's brows knit. "Sev." He kept walking, up the staircase, into the dormitory where the air was quieter and the danger was private. Behind his curtain, he pulled the green book from his bag and stared at it. The title was stamped in faint silver, "Jinxes and Hexes for the Practicing Student." Severus's pulse quickened. He opened it. The pages were dense with spells written in precise script. Not the childish charms Flitwick taught, but sharper things. Minor curses, binding hexes, spells designed to trip, to sting, to silence. Most were not lethal. That, he told himself, made it acceptable. He read until his eyes burned. He copied incantations into his own notebook with tiny, careful handwriting, adding notes in the margins, adjustments, variations, questions. Some of the spells seemed sloppy, their wand movements imprecise. Severus's mind itched to refine them. He practiced in secret when the dormitory was empty, when the other boys were in the common room or at dinner. He found an unused classroom near the dungeons and claimed it like a hidden den. He drew the curtains, lit the torches, and set up targets. Old quills, scraps of parchment, stones. "Silencio," he whispered, and the air seemed to still, the room's swallowing sound. He tested it again, shaping the wand movement smaller, sharper. "Langlock," he murmured experimentally, trying a tongue-binding jinx had half invented by combining two others. The spell fizzed weakly. Severus frowned, adjusting, correcting, pushing. He wasn't making weapons, he told himself. He was making tools. Tools for survival. One night, Lily cornered him in the common room when he tried to slip past. Her eyes were narrowed, determined. "You've been avoiding me," she said flatly. Severus's jaw tightened. "I've been busy." "With what?" Lily demanded. "You've been disappearing, and you look—" Her gaze flicked over his face, the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his mouth. "You look like you're carrying stones in your pockets." Severus's fingers curled. "I'm fine." Lily's voice sharpened. "No, you're not. You're shutting me out." Severus felt panic spike, hot and ugly. He thought of the green book hidden under his mattress. He thought of Lucius's smooth voice. He thought of Lily's fear at tea. He did not want to lie to her. He also could not risk telling her. Not yet. Lily would look at him differently. Lily's disappointment would be worse than James' laughter. "I'm studying," he said harshly. "That's all." Lily stared at him. For a moment, her expression softened as if she wanted to believe him. Then her jaw tightened. "All right," she said, voice low. "Study. But don't forget you're not alone here, Sev." Severus's throat tightened. Alone. The word was both wound and comfort. Lily turned away, hair swinging. She sat by the fire with other girls, laughing too loudly at something, pretending she wasn't hurt. Severus stood in the shadows and watched her, feeling a twist of guilt. He had wanted power because he thought it would keep him safe. Now he was beginning to understand that power, hoarded and hidden, could also make a person lonely. But loneliness was familiar. Loneliness at least didn't surprise him. He climbed the staircase to his dormitory and slid behind his curtain, pulling the green book into his hands like a secret friend. On the page, spells waited, obedient and sharp. Severus read on, and in the quiet the castle seemed to listen. Spring crept into Hogwarts in slow, reluctant steps. Snow melted into mud along the paths. The lake thawed, black water swallowing ice with a sigh. Buds appeared on the trees, and the air began to smell less like smoke and more like wet earth. With spring came revision. The library filled again, tables crowded with students hunched over parchment, quills scratching like insects. Professors assigned essays that seemed designed to steal sleep. Older students stalked corridors with haunted expressions, muttering about OWLS and NEWTS as if they were monsters waiting in cupboards. First years were not spared entirely. Their end-of-year exams loomed, small in the shadow of older students' terror, but still sharp enough to prick. Severus revised with ferocity. He made lists, diagrams, charts. He memorized ingredient properties until he could taste them in his sleep. He practiced wand movements in the air when he walked between classes, fingers twitching in his sleeves. Lily revised too, but she did it differently, talking things through, asking questions, laughing at her own mistakes. Sometimes she tried to draw Severus into studying with her. Sometimes Severus let her, for an hour, before he retreated behind his own curtain of silence. They were still friends, but there was a thinness between them now, like a layer of ice that hadn't quite melted. One afternoon in late May, Severus sat at the library table with his potions book open, scribbling notes on antidotes. He had Hagrid's gloves beside him now, the maroon wool fraying at the fingertips. Lily sat across from him, tapping her quill against her lip. "Chef," she said softly. "What's this?" Severus looked up, irritated, then followed her gaze. His notebook lay open beside his potions text, and on the page, in his own tight handwriting, were incantations that did not belong to first-year classes. Silencio. Langlock, half crossed out, rewritten, refined. A list of minor hexes annotated with reminders. Wrist sharp, not wide. Breathe out on the last syllable. Severus's stomach dropped. He'd been careless. He snapped the notebook shut. Nothing. Lily's eyes narrowed. That didn't look like nothing. Severus's jaw tightened. It's just practice. Practice for what? Lily asked, voice low. Sev, you're not getting those from the library. Severus felt heat crawl up his neck. I can read, he snapped. I can learn. That's not a crime. Lily leaned forward, eyes fierce. No, it's not, but you're acting like you're preparing for a war. Severus's mouth twisted. Maybe I am. Lily stared at him. The candlelight caught in her eyes, making them look almost golden. We're 11, she whispered. Severus swallowed hard. He looked away, throat tight. You don't know what it's like, he muttered. And the words were the same as before, bitter and useless. Lily's voice softened, but there was steel under it. Then tell me, she said. Stop treating me like I can't handle it. Severus's fingers tightened on his quill. He thought of his father's shouting, of fists on tables, of the way his mother's eyes sometimes went distant as if she were leaving her own body. He thought of Jameson's wand, of Sirius' laughter, of Filch's chains. He could tell Lily. He could pour it out and let her see the ugliness. But once she saw it, she might not be able to look at him the same way again. Lily's kindness was fierce, but it was also bright. Severus feared anything that might dim it. I'm fine. He lied again, and the lie tasted worse each time. Lily's face went still. She sat back, jaw clenched. All right, she said quietly. Be fine. Alone. The word alone hit Severus like a curse. He looked up sharply, but Lily had already bent over her parchment, quill moving hard. She wasn't crying. Lily didn't cry easily, but her shoulders were rigid, her posture too tight. Severus stared at his closed notebook, guilt gnawing. Across the library, Remus sat at a table by himself, surrounded by books. His face looked pale, shadows under his eyes that weren't just from study. Severus had noticed those shadows more often lately. He had noticed Remus's absences too, days when Remus looked ill, when he disappeared from meals and returned with his hair damp and his expression drained. It was none of Severus's business. And yet Severus's mind, always hungry for patterns, kept chewing on it. One evening, as the castle corridors grew quiet after curfew, Severus lay awake behind his curtain and listened. He had begun to listen more. He had begun to count footsteps, to notice doors opening, to map the castle's secrets in his head. The dormitory door clicked. Severus's eyes opened instantly. Remus slipped in alone, moving carefully as if he were in pain. His face was pale, lips pressed tight. He crossed to his bed and sat heavily, shoulders sagging. Severus watched through the crack in his curtain, heart pounding. Remus pulled his sleeves down over his wrists. The movement was quick, secretive. Something flashed, an edge of bandage perhaps, or a scratch. Severus's stomach tightened. Remus lay down without undressing, turning his face toward the wall. A low sound escaped him, half sigh, half suppressed groan. Severus's fingers curled around his blanket. Remus was hiding something. Remus always hid something. The thought of secrets in the room made Severus itch with suspicion. James and Sirius, for their part, seemed to watch Remus too, but in a different way, protective, as if guarding rather than hunting. Severus had seen Sirius snap at Peter once for making a joke about Remus being ill again. James had glared until Peter stammered an apology. Why? Severus lay in the dark, listening to Remus's uneven breathing across the room. His own breath felt too loud. Secrets, he thought, were like potions. They boiled under pressure until they either exploded or were carefully contained. Someone in this dormitory was containing something dangerous. Severus didn't know whether he wanted to expose it or protect it. He only knew that he could not stop noticing. The end-of-year exams came like a flood. Severus moved through them with cold focus, writing until his fingers cramped, stirring until his wrists ached. He brewed his potions with perfect timing. He performed charms with precise wand work. In Transfiguration he struggled. Turning a match into a needle took more patience than he liked, but he forced himself through. When the final exam ended, Students burst out into sunlight as if released from prison. Cheers echoed in corridors. Books were tossed into trunks with relief. Lily found Severus near the courtyard, her hair catching the sun. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright again. "We did it," she said, smiling. Severus nodded, throat tight. "Yes." Lily hesitated, then stepped closer. "Chef," she said softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Severus shook his head quickly. "You were right," he muttered, and the words surprised him as they left his mouth. Being alone." Lily's eyes softened. She reached out, hesitated, then squeezed his hand briefly, fierce and warm. "We're not done," she said. "It's only the first year." Severus swallowed. He wanted to believe her. Behind Lily, James and Sirius ran across the lawn, laughing, chasing a ball someone had conjured. Their joy looked effortless. Remus sat under a tree with a book, pretending to read, his eyes following his friends with quiet affection. Severus watched them all and felt the familiar twist inside him. Envy, longing, resentment, hope, all tangled together. It was only the first year, Lily had said, and already Severus could feel the shape of choices stretching ahead of him like a long corridor, full of shadows and bright doors. He didn't know which door he would take. He only knew he could not go back. Last week of term had a restless feeling, like the castle itself was shifting in anticipation of departure. Trunks began to appear in corners of dormitories. Students spoke of home, of summer, of what they would do when they were no longer trapped behind stone walls and schedules. Severus felt that restlessness differently. Home was not a promise. Home was a return to narrow rooms and sharp voices. Hogwarts, for all its cruelty, had become a place where he could at least breathe. One evening, when the air was warm enough to sit outside without shivering, Lily dragged Severus down to the lake. "Come on," she insisted, impatient. "You've been inside all day. You'll turn into one of those portraits that never moves." Severus wanted to refuse. He wanted to stay in the library, to stay where the world could be held in pages. But Lily's hand caught his sleeve, and there was something in her eyes, an insistence that felt like care, and Severus found himself walking with her down the sloping lawn. The lake lay black and calm, reflecting the pale sky. The giant squid's tentacles waved lazily near the surface, sending ripples out like sighs. Students lounged on the grass in scattered groups, laughing, tossing stones, showing off small bits of magic now that exams were finished. Lily sat with her knees drawn up, hugging them loosely. She kicked off her shoes and let her toes sink into the cool grass. Severus sat beside her, stiff, shoes still on, hands clasped. For a while, Lily talked about summer, about the small park in Cokeworth, about the bakery she liked, about how she might convince her parents to let her visit Diagon Alley again. Severus listened, nodding occasionally, his mind half on her words and half on the shadow of home. Then Lily fell quiet. She stared out at the lake, eyes distant. "Seth," she said softly, "will you write to me?" Severus's throat tightened. "Yes," he said quickly, too quickly. "Of course." Lily's gaze flicked to him. "You won't disappear, will you?" The question hit like a blow. Severus's jaw clenched. "I won't," he said. And he meant it, even if he didn't know how to keep the promise. A laugh rang out behind them. Severus's body tensed before his mind caught up. He turned his head slowly. James and Sirius were approaching across the grass, wands tucked into their sleeves, eyes bright with that familiar mix of boredom and appetite. Peter trailed behind them, looking nervous, glancing around as if hoping a professor might appear. Remus walked with them too, hands in his pockets, expression guarded. Lily's shoulders stiffened. "Oh, for Merlin's sake," she muttered. James's grin was bright. "Evans," he said, as if greeting her was his right. His eyes flicked to Severus. "Snape." Severus's fingers curled in the grass. His wand was in his pocket. He could feel it like a heartbeat. Sirius stopped a few feet away, looking down at them like they were something interesting he'd found under a rock. "Enjoying the view?" he asked Lily, voice too casual. Lily lifted her chin. "Yes, until you arrived." Sirius laughed softly. "Still sharp. I like that." James' grin widened at Sirius' words, as if they were sharing a joke. "We were just wondering," James said, "if Snape here had learnt any new tricks. He's been spending a lot of time in the dungeons." Lily's gaze sharpened. "So what?" James shrugged. "Just curious." Severus's stomach tightened. Curiosity from James meant trouble. Sirius leaned forward slightly, eyes glinting. "Show us something," he said. "Go on, Snape. Impress us." Severus's jaw clenched. "No." Sirius' grin sharpened. "No," he echoed. "He's learned a word." James' eyes flicked to Lily again, and his voice softened into something that might have been charm if Severus hadn't heard the mockery beneath it. "Evans, tell him to lighten up." Lily's hands clenched. "Leave him alone." James' smile faltered just a fraction, irritation flashing. "Why do you always—" "Because you're cruel," Lily snapped. The word landed hard, and for a heartbeat even Sirius' grin stilled. James' cheeks flushed. "I'm not." "You are," Lily cut in, fierce. "You think it's funny, but it's not. It's pathetic." Severus stared at Lily, a tight knot forming in his chest. Gratitude and dread tangled together. Lily's words were brave. They would also make James angrier. Sirius' grin returned, colder. "Ouch," he murmured. "Evans, you'll break his heart." James's gaze flicked to Sirius, then to Severus. Something hard settled over James' face. "All right," James said, voice low. "If he won't show us something, we'll show him." Severus's pulse spiked. He reached for his wand, fingers closing around it. Remus shifted, stepping forward half a pace. "James?" he said quietly. James ignored him. His wand came up, fast. Severus raised his own, ready to fire. Lily surged to her feet. "Don't," she warned, wand in hand now too. For a heartbeat, the four of them stood in a tense square. Wands raised, breath held, the lake behind them dark and watching. James' eyes flicked to Lily's wand, then back to Severus. His mouth twisted into a grin that was more threat than humor. "What are you going to do?" he asked Lily lightly. "Hex me." Lily's voice shook with anger. "If you touch him, yes." Sirius laughed softly. "He's got a guardian," he murmured, as if that was the funniest thing in the world. The laughter scraped something raw in Severus. He had hated being defended. He had hated needing Lily. Now, standing there with the lake wind on his face and James' wand pointed at him, he hated that Lily was risking herself for him. He also hated that some part of him wanted her to. "Leave," Severus said to James, voice low. "Just go." James' eyes glittered. "Make me." Severus's throat tightened. The words rose in him, ugly, sharp, desperate. Not spells. Words he'd heard in whispers from Slytherins. Words his father used when he wanted to wound. Words that would cut Lily and end the protection that made him feel small. Mud. He swallowed hard. The syllable burned behind his teeth. Lily's gaze flicked to him, searching, as if she sensed the poison rising. Her eyes were fierce and pleading at once. Severus's fingers tightened on his wand until his knuckles hurt. He forced the word back down, choking on it. "No," he said instead, voice shaking. "I'm not doing this." James blinked, thrown. Sirius' grin faltered, then returned brighter, as if he'd found a new angle of attack. "Oh, look at that," Sirius drawled. "The dungeon rat's growing a conscience." Peter let out a nervous laugh that died quickly under Remus's glare. Remus stepped forward fully now, voice low and firm. "Enough," he said, and there was something in the word that made even James hesitate, as if Remus had spoken in a tone older than all of them. James' jaw clenched. He looked at Lily, then at Severus. For a moment, Severus thought James might actually back away. Then Jameson's mouth twisted into that bright, reckless smile again. "Fine," he said. "Not worth it." He lowered his wand with theatrical boredom. Sirius followed, shrugging. "Come on," Sirius said to James, already turning away. "We can find someone who appreciates entertainment." James' eyes lingered on Lily for a heartbeat. "See you around, Evans," he said softly. Lily's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. They walked off across the grass, laughter returning as if the tension had been nothing. Peter hurried after them. Remus glanced back once, his gaze meeting Severus's for a brief moment, an apology perhaps or a warning. Then he followed too, shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying weight. Silence settled in their wake. Lily lowered her wand slowly. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Severus, eyes bright. "Are you all right?" she whispered. Severus stared at the spot where James had stood, throat tight. His knee ached faintly from the fall weeks ago. His chest felt tight with everything he hadn't said. "I'm fine," he managed. And for once it wasn't entirely a lie. He had not said the ugly word. He had not let it poison Lily. Lily's gaze held his, searching. "You looked like you were going to say something," she murmured. Severus swallowed hard. "Nothing," he said, voice rough. "Just anger." Lily's expression softened. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if speaking to a frightened animal. "It's all right to be angry," she said. "Just don't let it make you cruel." Severus's throat tightened painfully. Cruel. He had been cruel with spells before. He could feel the path toward cruelty like a slope, easy to slide down. He looked at Lily, at her fierce honesty, her willingness to stand between him and danger, and felt something shift. "I don't want to be like them," he whispered, and the words were so raw they shocked him. Lily's eyes softened further. She reached out and squeezed his hand, firm and warm. "Then don't," she said simply. The lake wind lifted her hair, red strands flying like flame. The squid's tentacle broke the surface briefly, then sank again, leaving ripples that spread and faded. Severus stared at the ripples and thought of how words could spread too. One ugly word, spoken in anger, rippling through years. He thought of how close he'd come to letting that happen. He squeezed Lily's hand back once, quickly, as if afraid to be seen doing it. Above them, the castle rose dark against the sky, watching as it always watched. Severus sat beside Lily in the fading light and felt, for the first time in weeks, that perhaps he could still choose. The Hogwarts Express steamed at Hogsmeade Station under a bright summer sky, as if the castle had decided to show off on the last day. Students swarmed the platform in excited chaos, trunks thumping, owls hooting, cats yowling. Voices rang with the relief of escape. Severus moved through the crowd with his bag clutched tight, his trunk pulled by an unseen charm that he kept checking, as if it might decide to abandon him. The air smelled of smoke and warm iron. It should have smelled like freedom. To Severus, it smelled like the moment before a door slammed. He found Lily near the middle of the train, standing on tiptoe to shove her trunk into the luggage rack. Her hair was brighter in the sunlight, almost painful to look at. "Chev," she called, relief in her voice. "I saved you a compartment." He followed her inside. The compartment was small and already warm from sun. Lily sat by the window, pushing her bag aside to make room. Severus slid it onto the seat opposite her, stiff, as if the cushions might bite. The train jerked, whistle shrieking, and Hogwarts began to move away. The platform slid past, the castle's distant towers flashing between trees, then disappearing. Lily pressed her forehead to the window for a moment, as if memorizing the view. "I can't believe it's over," she whispered. Severus watched her reflection in the glass, the way her eyes shone. "It's not over," he said automatically, and was surprised by the conviction in his own voice. Lily turned, smiling. "No," she agreed. It's just... Paused. She rummaged in her bag and pulled out a roll of parchment. I wrote down my address properly, she said briskly. So you can write without guessing. And she pulled out another piece of paper. Here. This is the best time to meet at the park in summer if you can. Severus stared at the paper. The neat handwriting looked impossibly simple. Meet. Die. As if meeting were a thing Severus could choose. As if summer were not a gauntlet to survive. I'll try, he said, and hated the weakness of the words. Lily's eyes narrowed. No, she said firmly. Don't try. Do. Severus's throat tightened. He forced himself to nod. All right. They talked. Slowly at first, then more easily. Lily told him about her plans. Reading ahead, convincing her parents to let her buy a pet owl next year, maybe practicing charms in her room if she could do it without frightening Petunia. Severus listened, answering when he had to, offering short remarks. He did not tell her what his summer would be. He did not want to see pity in her eyes. A knock rattled the compartment door. Lily startled. Severus's body tensed instantly, like a reflex. The door slid open without waiting for permission. James Potter stood in the doorway, hair ruffled by wind, eyes bright. Sirius leaned on the corridor wall behind him, grinning. Evans, James said, voice warm. Lily's smile tightened. Potter, Tower. James's gaze flicked to Severus. The grin sharpened. Snape, he said, as if tasting the name. Severus's fingers curled around his bag strap. Go away. Sirius laughed. Still charming, he drawled. James stepped into the compartment as if invited and sat on the edge of the seat beside Lily, too close. Lily shifted away automatically, expression hardening. We're just saying goodbye, James said, and his tone was light, but his eyes held something challenging. First year done. Survived us, did you? Severus's jaw clenched. Barely. Sirius leaned in the doorway, arms folded, eyes gleaming. He'll miss us, Sirius said mockingly. Who else will keep him company? Lily's eyes flashed. He's got me. James's gaze flicked to Lily, and for a heartbeat his expression softened, as if her loyalty impressed him despite himself. Yeah? He said quietly. You do. Severus felt something twist inside him. Jealousy, anger, something uglier. James looked at Lily as if she were a prize. Severus wanted to shove James out of the compartment with both hands. James' gaze returned to Severus. The softness vanished. Try not to lose us any more points next year, James said, grin returning. Severus's lips curled. Try not to be an idiot next year. Sirius laughed. James' eyes glittered. For a moment Severus thought James might draw his wand even here, even on the train. Instead, James stood as if bored. See you, he said to Lily, voice softer again. And then he looked at Severus with a bright, cruel smile. Snape. The door slid shut behind them with a sharp click. Lily exhaled slowly. Her hands were clenched in her lap. He's unbelievable, she muttered. Severus stared at the closed door, jaw tight. He's dangerous, he said, surprised by the honesty. Lily's gaze flicked to him. He's a show-off, she corrected. That's not the same. Severus didn't answer. In his bones, he wasn't sure she was right. The train rolled on, miles of countryside passing in green waves. Students moved up and down the corridor, calling to each other, trading sweets, laughing. The noise drifted in through the compartment door like distant weather. As King's Cross drew nearer, Severus' stomach tightened. The air in the compartment seemed to grow heavier. Lily grew quieter too, fidgeting with her parchment. Seth, she said finally, voice softer. You'll write? Severus swallowed. Yes. And you'll meet me, Lily pressed. Severus's mouth tightened. I said I would. Lily's eyes held his, fierce. Good. The train screeched into the station. Steam flooded the windows. The platform beyond was crowded with families, voices rising. Lily stood, suddenly all motion again, excitement and nervousness mixing. She grabbed her bag, tugged her trunk down with effort. Severus helped without speaking, lifting her trunk as if it were nothing, because he needed something to do with his hands. They stepped onto the platform, and the sounds hit them: muggle voices, luggage wheels, shouts, whistles. It felt like stepping into a different world's mouth. Lily's parents spotted her and waved, faces bright with relief. Petunia stood beside them, arms folded, expression pinched. When she saw Severus, her mouth twisted. Lily hugged her mother, then her father, then turned back to Severus as if she couldn't leave him even for a second. "Don't forget," she whispered, shoving the parchment with the meeting time into his hand again. "Don't die." Severus nodded, throat too tight for words. Lily's eyes searched his face. "See you," she said, and her voice trembled slightly, as if she sensed the weight of the goodbye. "See you?" Severus managed. Lily grabbed Petunia's sleeve, chattering about the train and the castle and the feast. Petunia yanked her arm away, glaring, and Lily rolled her eyes and kept talking anyway. Severus watched them for a moment. Lily's bright defiance, Petunia's cold resentment, the parents' bewildered warmth. Then he turned away before the sight could burn too much. He walked through the barrier between platforms with his trunk bumping behind him, and the world shifted again. The wizarding side fell away. The Muggle station swallowed him. No one waited. Severus stood for a moment beside a pillar, watching families reunite, feeling the familiar hollowness open in his chest. He tightened his grip on his bag and started walking. Outside, London smelled of exhaust and summer heat. He navigated to the train that would take him back to Cokeworth, sitting alone in a carriage full of strangers. The landscape slid past, fields turning to factories, green replaced by gray. By the time he reached Spinner's End, the sun was low, staining the sky a dirty orange through smoke. The river ran sluggish and brown. The houses hunched close together like they were ashamed. Severus walked toward his home with his trunk floating behind him, his wand tucked deep in his pocket. He kept the magic hidden, because this street was not a place that forgave strange things. The front door was slightly ajar. Voices seeped out. His father's, rough with drink, his mother's, thin and tired. Severus paused on the step, hand on the doorframe. For a heartbeat he considered turning away, walking back to the station, finding Lily's park instead. He could, technically. He could go anywhere now. But he didn't. He pushed the door open and stepped into the dim front room. The smell of stale beer hit him like a wall. His father's voice rose, sharp. His mother's voice murmured, placating. Neither of them looked up at first. When his father finally noticed him, his eyes narrowed. "Back are you?" he spat, as if Severus had returned from somewhere shameful. "Back from your freak school." Severus's fingers tightened around the strap of his bag. The urge to lift his wand flashed through him, hot, tempting. He could silence his father with a word. He could make the room obey. He thought of Lily by the lake. Don't let it make you cruel. Severus... He said nothing. He walked past his father's chair without looking at him and went to the small room he slept in, closing the door behind him. The room smelled of damp and old dust. It was too small. It was too familiar. Severus set his bag on the bed and pulled out his books. He laid Dumbledore's potions text on the thin blanket and stared at the gold lettering. Then he pulled out Lily's parchment, unfolding it carefully. Her handwriting stared up at him, bright and certain. Meet, dawdle, write, bite. Don't disappear. Severus sat on the edge of the bed, wand warm in his pocket, and listened to his father's voice in the next room, loud and ugly. In his mind, Hogwarts rose again. Stone towers, candlelit halls, the smell of ink and potion steam, the echo of Gryffindor cheers. Harder, brighter. Severus closed his eyes and breathed in slowly, as if he could pull the castle's air into his lungs and keep it there. He didn't feel brave, but he felt something else. Small, Stubborn, alive. A promise, perhaps, or a challenge. When he opened his eyes, he picked up his quill, and he began to write to Lily,